The air in the Department of Mysteries tasted of dust and ancient magic, thick with silence broken only by the soft, rhythmic hum of unseen enchantments. Hermione Granger stepped forward, her boots echoing too loudly against the obsidian floor, her breath shallow as though afraid to disturb the fragile balance of the chamber. Before her, the tapestry loomed, 12 feet tall, its threads shimmering like liquid silver under the dim, sourceless light. It had always been still, a relic of forgotten enchantments, chronicling the rise of the Ministry, the founding of Hogwarts, the fall of dark wizards. Until now, a low thrum pulsed from its surface, threads shifting like serpents beneath a veil. A battle scene from the Goblin rebellions dissolved into smoke, reweaving itself into something new. A duel beneath a blood-red moon, figures cloaked in unfamiliar sigils. Hermione's fingers twitched toward her wand, but she held back. This wasn't destruction. It was rewriting. "Miss Granger," came a voice from behind, crisp and laced with unease. "We've been expecting you." She turned to see Thaddeus Croft, head archivist, his face pale beneath a shock of white hair. His hands trembled as he gestured toward the tapestry. "It began 3 hours ago. No known spell triggered it. No one entered the chamber. And yet, it changes, constantly. Events that never happened are being woven in. Locations that don't exist. And names. What names?" Hermione asked, already scanning the shifting weave. Croft hesitated. "Malfoy. Draco Malfoy. His crest appears in a sequence dated 50 years from now. A coronation? A curse. We can't interpret it. But it's recurring, threaded through multiple timelines." Hermione's stomach tightened. Draco Malfoy. She hadn't spoken his name aloud in years, not since the quiet aftermath of the war, when paths diverged and silence settled between them like frost. He retreated into the shadows of his family's tarnished name, rebuilding quietly, disavowing the past. Or so she'd heard. "This can't be random," she murmured, stepping closer. The tapestry rippled, and for a heartbeat she saw herself, older, weary-eyed, standing beside a man whose pale profile she recognized anywhere. Draco, their hands nearly touching. Then the image dissolved. "Time magic," she whispered. "Not just history. It's showing possibilities, probabilities. But why rewrite them now?" "We don't know," Croft admitted. "But the runes along the border, they're activating. Portals, we think. Tiny rifts in the fabric of the weave. We've contained 3 so far. One open near the section depicting the Tri-Wizard tournament. Another near the Battle of Hogwarts. And one, this is what concerns us, near the night Dumbledore died." Hermione's breath caught. That moment. That tower. So much had changed since then. So many choices left unspoken. "We believe the tapestry is not merely recording history," Croft continued. "It's correcting it. Or being corrected. By something, or someone, outside our timeline. And Malfoy," she asked, voice tight. "He's part of the pattern. The magic insists on it. We tried to remove his thread. It resisted. Lashed back. A curse nearly took out 2 of our best enchanters." Hermione stared at the shifting silver, her mind racing. A sentient tapestry, rewriting history, pulling Draco Malfoy into its design. It made no sense, unless someone's using it to alter the past, she said slowly, and the tapestry is fighting back, self-correcting. But it needs balance. It needs 2 people, connected by something the magic recognizes. Connected. How? She didn't answer. She didn't want to. But the thread pulsed again, and for a fleeting second, the image returned. Older her, older Draco, standing before a door woven of starlight and shadow, hands clasped not in friendship, but in something deeper. Something inevitable. A cold wind stirred in the chamber, though there were no doors, no windows. And far below, in the Ministry's holding cells, a young man with storm-gray eyes awoke with a gasp, his family crest burning faintly against his collarbone, as if awakened by a thread pulled across time. The air in the Department of Mysteries was always still, but tonight it hummed with a low, almost imperceptible resonance, like the breath of something vast and dreaming. Hermione stood before the tapestry, her wand tip casting a cool blue light across its shifting surface. Threads that had once depicted the signing of the International Confederation of Wizards Charter now flickered with unfamiliar sigils, dissolving into seams of war-torn cities under skies choked with violet smoke. She had been watching it for hours, trying to parse the logic in its chaos, but the tapestry didn't obey history, it rewrote it. Then she saw it. A silver serpent coiled around a gnarled oak, its eyes 2 flecks of polished onyx. The Malfoy crest, not in the past, not among the records of pure blood lineage or the Battle of Hogwarts. No, this was woven into a future tableau, one that hadn't existed yesterday. A shattered atrium, the Ministry's golden fountain cracked down the middle, and standing in the wreckage, a figure cloaked in ash-gray robes, their face obscured, but their emblem unmistakable. Hermione stepped closer, her breath catching. That's not possible. It's rather difficult to argue with embroidery. Granger. She turned. Draco Malfoy stood in the arched entrance, his usual smirk tempered by something uneasy in his eyes. He hadn't been summoned. He'd been called, like her, by the Ministry's emergency sigil, that activated only when bloodline magic was at stake. He looked paler than she remembered, shadows beneath his eyes, as though he hadn't slept since the first reports of the Tapestry's changes. They said my name lit up on a ward, he said, stepping forward. A ward I didn't even know existed. Then I see this, he gestured sharply at the crest. And you tell me it's not possible? It's not in context, she said, voice steady, despite the knot tightening in her chest. The tapestry doesn't predict. It records. Or it did. Now it's inventing. And your family crest, your future, is tied to a moment of catastrophic breach. Look, she pointed. See the runes beneath the oak? They're not Malfoy. They're older. Obscure. I think they're binding spells. Time-locked. Draco stared at the image. His reflection in the polished floor seemed fractured by the ripple of the fabric. You say I'm part of whatever's coming. I'm saying the tapestry thinks so. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Brilliant. So now I'm not just the son of a disgraced Death Eater. I'm prophesied to destroy the Ministry? That's not what I said, Hermione replied, though the possibility hung between them, heavy and unspoken. She studied the threads more closely. The serpent's tail curled into a spiral that didn't belong to the Malfoy design, a spiral she'd seen in ancient Sumerian enchantments, used to bind portals across time. Wait, this isn't just a symbol, it's a key. A key to what? She reached out, fingers hovering just above the fabric. The air crackled. To the layers beneath, the tapestry isn't just changing history, it's hiding doors. And your crest, it's a latch. Before he could respond, the silver serpent shimmered. The threads writhed, not with slow embroidery, but like living wire. A seam split open along the crest, revealing a narrow rift in the fabric, no wider than a handspan. Through it, a cold wind whispered, carrying the scent of rain and burning parchment. Draco stepped back. That wasn't there a second ago. No, Hermione murmured, but it is now, and it's open because of you. He looked at her, gray eyes sharp with suspicion. You think my blood triggered it? Something did. The rift pulsed. A sound came through, distant, distorted. A child's voice, calling out in the dark. Hermione recognized it instantly. Her own. Her breath hitched. That's me. That's the night I was at Godrich Hollow, after the war, when I went back to restore my parents' memories. Draco turned to her, startled. You never told anyone the exact date. I didn't have to. The tapestry knows. They stared at each other, the weight of the moment settling, like dust after an explosion. The past wasn't just being rewritten. It was being accessed, and the Malfoy crest had opened the door. The summons arrived at dawn, sealed with the obsidian insignia of the Department of Mysteries, its edges faintly shimmering as if woven from shadow. Draco Malfoy was still in his dressing robe, sipping bitter elf-brewed tea by the frost-laced window of his townhouse, when the parchment unrolled itself mid-air and hissed his name in a voice that wasn't quite human. He didn't flinch. Years of careful composure had taught him better, but the teacup trembled against the saucer. Draco Abraxas Malfoy, the voice intoned. You are required immediately at the Ministry. Refusal constitutes obstruction of magical continuity under Statute 12 of the Temporal Accord. Report to Level 9. You have 1 hour. The parchment incinerated itself in a flash of blue flame, leaving only the scent of burnt sage and a residue of unease. Draco exhaled slowly, watching his breath fog the glass. The Department of Mysteries. Again. He hadn't set foot there since the war, and certainly not since the trials. The Ministry didn't summon former Death Eaters, no matter how many pardons they'd earned, for routine matters. Still, he dressed with precision, charcoal gray robes, silver clasps at the wrists, boots polished to a mirror finish, armor of a sort. By the time he stepped into the Ministry atrium, the golden fountain had been replaced with a modest stone archway humming with containment rows, and the air tasted of ozone and old magic. Level 9 was colder. The corridor stretched unnaturally long, the torches set too far apart, their light swallowed by the dark stone. The door to the Hall of Tapestry stood ajar, guarded by 2 aurors, whose wands were drawn not in threat, but readiness. Inside, the air hummed. The tapestry dominated the chamber, an immense living weave of silk and spellwork, larger than a Quidditch pitch, suspended without visible support. It depicted scenes of wizarding history, the founding of Hogwarts, the signing of the International Confederation Charter, the fall of Grindelwald. But now, threads were moving, not unraveling, star rewriting star. A silver thread slithered like a serpent across the surface, weaving itself into the Battle of Hogwarts, stitching in figures where none had stood before. And there, in the lower right quadrant, pulsing faintly in deep emerald and black, his family crest. Draco's breath caught. Hermione Granger stood before the tapestry, her arms crossed, her expression tight with concentration. She turned at his entrance, her eyes narrowing slightly, just enough to remind him that some wounds never fully scarred. "You're late," she said. "I wasn't exactly given a choice," he replied, stepping forward. "What is this?" "A temporal anomaly," she said. "The tapestry isn't just recording history, it's star-changing start. And for some reason, your starline star keeps appearing in the future threads. Not as a footnote, as a pivot point." "That's impossible," Draco said, though his voice lacked conviction. The Malfoy name had been scrubbed from honors, from influence, from trust. To see it re-emerging, star here, star, in the Ministry's most sacred archive, felt like a mockery. "It's not," said a new voice. Kingsley Shacklebolt stepped from the shadows, his deep voice calm, but his gaze unyielding. "The Wizengamot has reviewed the evidence. The changes began 3 days ago. First, your father's release from Azkaban was rewritten. No trial, no sentence. Then your mother's testimony at the War Tribunal vanished. Now, this." He gestured to the crest, now glowing steadily. "If the tapestry continues altering events," Hermione added, "the timeline could fracture. We don't know what else might be erased or rewritten. Children born, spells cast, wars fought." Draco looked from her to Kingsley. "And you want Starmie Star to help?" "We need someone with intimate knowledge of your family's lineage," Kingsley said. "Blood magic is threaded through this. The enchantments respond to ancestral resonance. You're the last true Malfoy." The words star, last star, hung in the air like a curse. "I'm not a historian," Draco said, though he already knew refusal wasn't an option. The Wizengamot didn't ask. They demanded. "No," Hermione said, stepping closer. "But you're the only one whose blood might let us step star into star the tapestry. There are portals, fissures in the weave. We think they lead to the moments being altered, but they won't open for just anyone." He looked at her then, really looked. The weight of responsibility in her eyes mirrored his own, though hers had always worn it like a mantle. His had been a chain. "And if I refuse?" he asked quietly. Kingsley didn't answer. He didn't need to. The auras at the door shifted slightly. The tapestry pulsed, and for a moment, Draco saw another thread glow, his own face, younger, standing beside Harry Potter in what looked like Diagon Alley. A moment that never happened. The past was unraveling, and somehow he was meant to mend it. "Fine," he said, "but I'm not doing this for the Ministry, or for Star You Star." Hermione met his gaze. "Then do it for the truth." He didn't answer, but when she reached for the tapestry and the fabric shimmered like water, he stepped forward, just one step, into the light. The air in the Department of Mysteries hummed with a low, resonant frequency that made the bones in Hermione's jaw ache. Before them, the tapestry stretched from floor to vaulted ceiling, its threads shimmering like molten silver in the dim, sourceless light. It wasn't just a weaving of fabric, it pulsed, breathed. Threads slid and reknotted themselves in slow, deliberate motions, rewriting histories with each subtle shift. Hermione adjusted her spectacles, fingers twitching at her side, itching to take notes, to classify, to understand. "It's not possible," Draco muttered, stepping closer, his voice tight. "That crest, my family's crest, it wasn't in the original design. I know it wasn't." Hermione didn't look at him. Her gaze traced a newly formed border of serpentine ivy, winding around a scene depicting the signing of the International Statute of Secrecy. Magic doesn't concern itself with what possible star. Malfoy. Not when time is involved. This isn't embroidery. It's a living chronicle, one that's been tampered with. He turned sharply. "And you expect me to believe you're the only one qualified to handle it? You've never even studied temporal textiles." "I've studied everything," she snapped, finally meeting his eyes. "And unlike some people, I don't rely on inherited privilege to get by." Draco's lip curled. "At least I wasn't dragged here by ministry decree. You volunteered, Star. Why? Guilt? A need to prove you're still the brightest witch of your age? That's rich coming from someone whose family name is now stitched into future star events. Like a prophecy," she shot back, jabbing a finger toward the upper quadrant where the Malfoy sigil glowed faintly amid swirling constellations of thread. "If anything, Swar, you're Star the anomaly. Why would the Tapestry pull Star? You Star into this. Maybe it recognizes bloodline," he said, stepping forward until the space between them crackled with old resentments. "Maybe it knows something you don't. Or maybe," Hermione said coldly, "it's reacting to instability. That crest shouldn't be there. None of these changes should. And until we figure out how Star it's being rewritten, we need method. Precision, not arrogance." She pulled out her wand and traced a slow arc across the surface. A soft blue light spilled from the tip, illuminating the underlying lattice of the weave. Tiny runes flickered into view, ancient, shifting, almost too fast to read. Draco watched, arms crossed. "You're disrupting the resonance. Can't you feel it? The threads are reacting to your magic. Like it's an intruder." "Of course they are," she said without looking. "They're not used to structured analysis. They're chaotic. Emotional almost." "Exactly," he said. "You're treating it like a textbook. It's not. It's Star alive Star. You don't dissect a living thing. You listen to it." Hermione lowered her wand, turning to him. "And what, pray tell, do you suggest?" "Stand here and Star commune Star with it. I suggest not poking it like a dead frog in potions class." He stepped forward, raising his own wand, not with a spell, but with an open palm. He exhaled slowly, and the tip of his wand glowed with a soft gold-tinged light. "Watch," the Tapestry responded. Threads near his wand slowed, then coiled gently, like vines seeking sunlight. A small portal, no larger than a handspan, blued in the fabric, swirling with hues of deep violet and ash. Inside, a blurred scene flickered, a young girl with bushy brown hair clutching a time-turner in a corridor. Hermione stiffened. "That's your third year," Draco finished, his voice quieter now. "You can't change it, not yet, but the Tapestry remembers. Its Star knows Star you," she swallowed. "You didn't use a spell." "No," he said. "I didn't force it. I asked." Silence settled between them, thick and unfamiliar. For the first time, Hermione looked at Draco, not as an adversary, but as someone who might, just might, understand magic in a way she never had. Not through books, not through logic, but through something older, something woven into blood. She took a slow breath. "Show me how." The air in the Department of Mysteries hummed with a quiet, ancient energy, the kind that settled in the bones and whispered of things long buried. Hermione stood before the Tapestry, her breath shallow, eyes tracing the shifting patterns that had no right to move. Threads of silver and crimson wove themselves into new scenes, battles never fought, treaties never signed, faces she almost recognized, flickering in and out of existence like reflections on disturbed water. It wasn't supposed to do this. The great Tapestry was meant to be a record, not a living thing. Yet here it was, breathing, altering, rewriting history, with every passing second. She reached out, not to touch, but to feel the magic radiating from its surface, a warmth like sunlight through stained glass. Then, without warning, A single golden thread slipped free from the weave, curling like smoke in the still air. It hovered for a heartbeat, catching the dim light, before darting toward her. Hermione flinched, but it was too late. The thread coiled gently around her wrist, cool at first, then pulsing with a slow, rhythmic heat. "What in Merlin's name?" she whispered. The thread tugged. Not hard, but insistently, like a child pulling at a parent's sleeve. Her fingers curled instinctively, trying to pry it loose, but it held fast, seamless where it met the fabric of her sleeve. And then the tapestry, star rippled star, the hard wall. The entire expanse shimmered, as if submerged in water, and the scene before her changed. Gone was the ministry corridor. Now she saw a courtyard under a bruised twilight sky. Hogwarts, but wrong. The towers were taller, sharper, their spires crowned with unfamiliar sigils. Students moved below in dark robes embroidered with silver serpents. Slytherin banners hung from every archway. And there, standing at the top of the stairs, a younger Draco Malfoy, paled, proud, his wand raised not in defense, but in declaration. Hermione's breath caught. That hadn't happened. She would have remembered. The thread tugged again, stronger this time, pulling her forward. Her boots scraped against the stone as she resisted, heels digging in. No, this isn't real. This is star-invented star. But the magic didn't care for logic. The air thickened, pressing in around her like a closing fist. She could smell rain on stone, hear the distant roll of thunder, feel the chill of a wind that didn't exist in the Department of Mysteries. Then a voice, sharp and familiar, cut through the haze. "Granger, what are you doing?" She turned, heart pounding. Draco stood in the doorway, his cloak half-buttoned, hair disheveled as if he'd just been roused from sleep. His eyes locked onto her wrist, widening slightly. "That's not possible," he said, stepping closer. "The family crest only responds to bloodline." "It's not your crest," she snapped, though her voice trembled. "It's something else. It's star pulling star me." He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his robes and pulled out a small, ornate dagger, black handle, silver serpent coiled around the hilt. "Give me your hand." "I'm not letting you cut it off, Malfoy." "It's already bound you," he said, voice low. "If you go through that portal without protection, you'll be unmade. Thread magic doesn't forgive trespassers." She hesitated. Every instinct screamed to pull away, but the thread was tightening, the vision in the tapestry growing clearer. She could hear voices now, her own among them, saying words she didn't remember speaking. With a shaky breath, she extended her wrist. Draco didn't flinch. He dragged the blade lightly across his palm, muttered a phrase in Parseltongue she barely caught, and then pressed his bleeding hand against the golden thread. For a moment, nothing. Then the thread star shivered. Star. It pulsed once, twice, and split, another strand peeling away, winding around Draco's forearm like a serpent, claiming its mate. He looked up, gray eyes stormy. "Well, it seems we're going together." Before she could protest, the tapestry star opened star. A rush of wind. A rush of wind. A sound like 1,000 whispers. And the world folded in on itself. They fell. The air inside the Department of Mysteries had gone still, thick with the scent of old wool and something sharper. Ozone, maybe, or the metallic tang of unraveling magic. Hermione's fingers hovered just above the tapestry's surface, where threads the color of midnight and molten gold pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat beneath fabric. Draco stood a few paces behind her, arms crossed, his usual sneer replaced by wary stillness. "It's not supposed to move on its own," Hermione murmured, more to herself than to him. "It's doing it anyway," Draco replied, voice low. She touched it. The world tore, not with sound, but with a silent, gut-wrenching lurch, as though reality had been stitched together with fraying thread, and someone had just tugged too hard. Hermione gasped, her hand swallowed by the weave, then her arm, then her entire body yagged forward like a puppet on a snapped string. She caught a glimpse of Draco lunging, not to stop her, but pulled in too. And then there was only the sensation of falling through cloth, of threads wrapping around her limbs, whispering in a language just beyond comprehension. She landed hard on flagstones, the impact jolting up her spine. The air smelled of rain, parchment, and something unmistakable. Hogwarts. Hermione pushed herself up, heart-hammering. The great hall stretched before her, but wrong. The banners hummed crooked. The ceiling, usually a flawless mimicry of the sky, flickered like a faulty projection. Cloudy one moment, star-strewn the next. Students milled about, robes askew, voices overlapping in a low hum, but their faces were blurred at the edges, as if painted with smudged charcoal. Draco groaned beside her, rolling onto his back. Merlin's left sock. What was star that star? The tapestry, she said, standing shakily. It pulled us in. Oh, through. He sat up, brushing dust from his sleeves with fastidious annoyance. Where are we? Hermione's breath caught. A banner above the staff table bore the crest of Dumbledore's army, but it wasn't red and gold. It was silver and green. No, she whispered. Draco followed her gaze. That's not right. It's our 5th year, she said, voice tight. But something's changed, something fundamental. They moved cautiously through the hall, keeping to the edges. Students passed without recognition. One boy in Ravenclaw robes glanced at Hermione, blinked, then turned away, as if she'd vanished from his mind. It was unnerving. Not being seen, not being Star, remembered Star. Then she saw herself. A younger Hermione, 15, hair wild, robes slightly too long, sat at the Gryffindor table, scribbling in a notebook, but she wasn't alone. Beside her, laughing at something she'd said, was a younger Draco Malfoy. Hermione froze. Draco made a strangled noise. What in the name of? That's Starmy Star, but I was never friends with me, she finished. They watched, stunned, as the younger Draco slid a book across the table. Advanced Arithmancy Principles, and the younger Hermione smiled, genuinely, warmly at him. This isn't how it happened, Hermione said, her voice hollow. No, Draco agreed, jaw tight. But it's Star could Star have, if things had gone differently. A memory flickered, his hand extended after the Department of Mysteries battle, not in mockery, but in gratitude. If she'd taken it, if he'd meant it. The air shimmered between them. A thread, thin, glowing silver, wove itself from the younger Hermione's sleeve to the younger Draco's, then snaked upward, vanishing into the ceiling like a stitch in the sky. That's the alteration, Hermione realized. A thread of changed history. We have to follow it. And then what? Draco asked. Unravel it? Rewind it? We restore what was, she said, though her voice wavered. Or what Star should Star have been? He looked at her, really looked, for the first time since they'd been thrown into this. And if what should have been wasn't the best version? The question hung between them, heavier than magic, older than time. But the thread pulsed, insistent. Hermione took a breath, one thread at a time, and together they stepped forward, into the weave of a world that never was. The air in the Department of Mysteries hummed with a low, resonant frequency that made Hermione's molars ache. Before her, the tapestry, a vast, floor-to-ceiling weave of enchanted silk and spell thread, shimmered as though submerged beneath still water. Threads pulsed with color, rewinding, reweaving, forming scenes that hadn't happened, or hadn't happened yet. Draco stood at her side, his posture rigid, one hand absently brushing the crest, embroidered on his sleeve. It was wrong. Not the crest itself, silver serpent coiled around a lily, a design he'd never seen in any Malfoy lineage, but the fact that it now pulsed in the tapestry's future quadrant like a second heart. It wasn't there yesterday, he said, voice low. It wasn't there a week ago, Hermione replied, tracing a finger along the edge of the weave. No heat, no magic discharge, just silk that remembered things that hadn't occurred. Someone stitching new timelines into the fabric of history. Subtly, but not subtly enough. She stepped closer. The tapestry responded, threads shifting like schools of silver fish. A scene formed. Hogwarts courtyard, autumn leaves swirling, familiar, then unfamiliar. A group of students clustered near the west archway. Not just any students. A Hufflepuff prefect she didn't recognize, a Ravenclaw with a faint scar across his brow, and, her breath caught, Harry, but not quite Harry. His robes bore the Slytherin green. No, she whispered. That's not possible, Draco said, stepping forward. Potter never... Exactly. He didn't. But here he did. She reached out, hesitating. This alliance, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, Slytherin, united under some banner. I don't recognize the sigil. The emblem hovered above them in the weave, a phoenix, with 3 heads, wings outstretched over a chained cauldron. Dark magic seeped from the image, subtle but insidious, like poison in wine. This changes everything, she murmured. If Harry had joined Slytherin, if he'd allied with pure-blood traditionalists early on, Dumbledore's influence would have waned. Voldemort might have never fallen first time. Draco exhaled sharply. Or worse, he might have been corrupted from within. A hero turned quiet tyrant. That's not power broken. That's power co-opted. She looked at him, surprised. You've thought about this. Of course I have, he snapped, then softened. We all have. What if things had gone differently? What if I'd chosen another path in the room of requirement? What if I'd said one word, done one thing? The tapestry rippled. A new thread emerged, gold and trembling, slicing through the false alliance. A figure stepped forward in the weave, her younger self, wand raised, standing between Harry and the Slytherin prefect. That's me, she said, stunned. But I don't remember that moment, because it didn't happen, Draco said. Not until now. The tapestry's creating memories, implanting them. A chill settled between her shoulder blades. Then we're not just observers, we're participants. Every time we look, we're confirming the change. He turned to her. So what do? We go in, she said. There's a portal, here. She pressed her palm against a knot of silver thread at the tapestry's base. It warmed instantly, unraveling into a narrow arch of light, no wider than a doorway. It leads to that courtyard, before the alliance forms. You're mad, Draco said, though he didn't step back, altering the past. Even to fix it? We're not altering, we're restoring. The timeline remembers the truth. This tapestry is just wounded, we're its healers. He looked at the shimmering arch, then at her. And if we change something else by accident? Then we fix that too, she said. One thread at a time. A beat passed. Somewhere deep in the department, a bell chimed, soft, mournful. Draco straightened. Lead the way, Granger, she nodded, stepped into the light. The world folded. The air in the Department of Mysteries hummed with a frequency that made Hermione's molars ache. Before them, the tapestry, once a static, its immense record of magical lineage and pivotal events, shimmered like liquid silver, threads writhing as if alive. Colors bled into one another, names flared and vanished, and the crest of House Malfoy, once confined to the past, now pulsed stubbornly in a section labeled Star, the reconciliation of one star, a future event that hadn't happened yet. It's not just rewriting history, Hermione whispered, fingers hovering over the fabric. It's forecasting, and it's wrong. Draco stood beside her, arms crossed, jaw tight. My crest shouldn't be there. That event was supposed to involve Dumbledore's army, not me. Not me. Unless it was always meant to, she said, more to herself. Unless the tapestry isn't broken, it's revealing what was obscured. He scoffed. You're saying I was meant to stand side by side with Potterslot in some future peace summit. Spare me the prophecy fluff, Granger. But she wasn't listening. Her eyes traced a thinner thread, frayed and discolored. It led backward into the past. A moment near the end of the Battle of Hogwarts, the room of requirement, fire, and 2 figures, smaller, younger, frozen mid-motion, one with wild curls, the other with a pale hand outstretched. Her breath caught. That's us, Draco said, voice low. Yes, but not as we remember it. In the tapestry's version, younger Hermione hadn't run from the collapsing room. She'd hesitated, turned back, reached for Draco as the ceiling gave way, and in that altered memory, they both fell. We didn't, she said. I didn't go back. I ran. I thought you were dead. And I thought you left me to burn, Draco said, quieter now. Guess the tapestry knows how close it really was. Truth settled between them, heavy and unspoken. The tapestry wasn't just showing changes. It was reacting to the emotional weight of what might have been. Every choice, every near miss, carried a resonance strong enough to warp time. We have to fix it, Hermione said. But we can't interact. not directly. If we touch our younger selves, we risk a cascade. Time might fracture. Draco eyed the shimmering portal embedded in the tapestry, a vertical slit of iridescent light. So how do we set it right without being seen? Indirect influence, she said, already pulling a small silver spool from her robes, a remnant of her time-turner research. We nudge, like dropping a stone in water. The ripples adjust the course without touching the swimmer. He raised an eyebrow. You've done this before. Never. But it's theory. And right now, theory is all we have. They stepped toward the portal. The air thickened, tasting of ash and old parchment. Hermione wound the silver thread around her index finger, whispering an incantation that pulled at the edges of time. Draco placed his hand over hers. Not for magic, she realized, but for steadiness. "Ready?" she asked. "No," he said, "but let's go anyway." They stepped through. The world reassembled in smoke and screams. Flames licked the walls of the room of requirement. Around them, debris rained down. Across the chamber, younger Draco staggered, arm bleeding, robes torn. Younger Hermione, face streaked with soot, turned toward the exit, then hesitated. This was the moment. Hermione didn't move forward. Instead, she lifted the silver thread and snapped it between her fingers. A pulse, silent, invisible, rippled outward. Near the doorway, a fallen beam groaned. A spark flared. The fire surged, blocking the exit. Younger Hermione gasped, turned, saw Draco trapped. And for a heartbeat she wavered. Then she ran, not toward safety, but toward him. Draco beside Hermione exhaled, long and slow. She went back. She always almost did, Hermione said softly. We just reminded her. The scene dissolved. The tapestry beyond the portal stitched itself anew. The frayed thread mended. The future shifted, subtly but surely, and in the restored weave, Draco's crest remained, not as an intruder, but as part of the pattern. Rain lashed against the high, arched windows of the Slytherin common room, casting jagged reflections across the green-tinged stone walls. The fire in the hearth spat and hissed, low and reluctant, as if even the flames knew something was wrong. Hermione pressed her palm against the tapestry's edge, feeling the unnatural warmth beneath her fingers. The threads pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat out of time. It's not just showing the past, she murmured. It's rewriting it. Right now. Draco stood a few paces away, arms crossed, his gray eyes scanning the shifting patterns with a mixture of disgust and fascination. And you still expect me to believe this is real? That my family crest appearing in a prophecy woven from moonlight and old magic means I'm, what, destined? Chosen? You were marked, Hermione said, not looking at him. Just like me. Except yours came embroidered in silver thread and cursed ancestry. A flicker in the tapestry drew her attention, a scene unfolding in muted colors. A younger Draco, barely 14, standing at the edge of a corridor listening. A whisper passed between two figures, Auntie Parkinson and Theodore Knott. Their words were lost, but their meaning wasn't. They were planning to sabotage the Gryffindor Quidditch brooms before the final match. A minor act, petty even, but one that twisted the timeline just enough. Harry lost focus, fell during the match, missed the snitch by seconds. And then, in the aftermath, the ripple. Ron turned bitter. Harry withdrew. The trio fractured years before the war even began. This never happened, Draco said quietly. No, Hermione agreed. But it almost did. And someone's pulling it forward, making it real. Draco exhaled sharply. Pansy always hated Gryffindor, but she never would have gone through with it. Not without me. Exactly, Hermione said, turning to him. You were the fulcrum. Your presence, or absence, decided whether they acted. And now someone's erasing your influence. He stared at her. You want me to go back? To stop it? To be star there, she corrected. Not to stop it. To let it unfold as it should. To be who you were, arrogant, insufferable, but present star. A ghost of a smirk touched his lips. A flattery will get you everywhere, Granger. They stepped through the portal woven into the tapestry's edge. A seam of silver thread that parted like mist. The air turned thick and cool, the scent of damp stone and old parchment filling their lungs. They emerged behind a tapestry in the east corridor, just out of sight. Voices echoed ahead. "And if Draco finds out, he'll just laugh," Pansy was saying. "He doesn't care about Quidditch anymore. Says it's beneath him." Hermione glanced at Draco. He looked wounded. Not angry, wounded. "That's not true," he muttered. "I cared. I just never let anyone see it." "You still don't," she said softly. He didn't answer. They crept forward. Through a crack in the drapery, they saw the younger Draco walking down the hall, shoulders tense, jaw set. He paused when he heard them, just for a heartbeat, then kept walking. Too fast, too deliberate. He's pretending not to care, Hermione realized. But he heard. Draco nodded. "And if I don't turn back, if I don't say something, this version sticks. They sabotage the brooms. The timeline splits. So go," Hermione urged. "Say something. Anything." Draco hesitated. Then, with a breath that sounded like surrender, he stepped out. "Parkinson," his voice cut through the hush, sharp as a blade. "If you touch those brooms, I'll make sure your name is mud in every pure-blood drawing room from here to Wiltshire." The trio froze. Young Draco turned, eyes wide. Pansy blinked. "Draco, since when do you care about?" "Since always," he snapped. "And if you can't keep your petty grudges in check, maybe you don't belong in Slytherin at all." The silence that followed was electric. Then slowly Pansy backed down, not shrugged, muttering something unintelligible. The moment passed. As the past settled back into its rightful shape, the tapestry behind them shimmered, threads reknitting, colors deepening, the true history restored. Hermione let out a breath. "You were good at that." Draco looked at his hands. "I used to be good at a lot of things, most of them terrible. Not this," she said. "This was necessary, and human." He met her eyes then, and for the first time there was no mask. Just the quiet weight of a man seeing himself, not as he was feared or hated or remembered, but as he truly had been, and might still become. The air in the Department of Mysteries tasted different when they stumbled back through the veil of shimmering threads, thicker, charged with a quiet hum that hadn't been there before. Hermione's knees gave out first, her fingers clutching the cold stone floor as the tapestry behind them settled, its once chaotic weave now smooth and silent. Draco caught himself against the archway, breathing hard, his wand still clenched in his hand like a lifeline. "We're back," Hermione whispered, more to herself than to him. She looked around, eyes scanning the chamber. The torches flickered with their usual blue flame. The shelves of glass orbs remained untouched, and the celestial dome above spun with its eternal quiet. Yet something felt off, like the silence had too many echoes. Draco pushed off the arch, brushing dust from his sleeves. "If this is your idea of back, Granger, I'd like a refund. That last jump nearly tore my arm off." He flexed his left shoulder, wincing. A thin, silvery scar, new and still tender, ran from his collarbone down to his elbow, a souvenir from the Battle of Hogwarts, except it hadn't been there before they'd gone back. Hermione stood slowly, her robe singed at the hem. She touched her temple, frowning. I remember saying no to Harry when he asked me to come back. But now I said yes." Her voice cracked. "I changed my mind. In the tapestry, I told my younger self to stay," Draco finished, watching her, and she listened. She nodded, eyes wide. "The timeline, it's healing but not perfectly, like a wound stitched too quickly." They left the chamber together, the silence between them, no longer hostile, but layered, full of shared battles fought in memories that no one else could remember. The ministry corridors were quiet, nearly empty. A single owl swooped past, dropping a sealed scroll at their feet. Hermione picked it up with trembling fingers. The wax bore the Malfoy crest. Draco froze. "That's impossible. My father's seal was broken after the war. No one uses it." She broke the seal. The message was brief, written in a hand she didn't recognize. "Star the Veil remembers what you forget. Seek the loon beneath the lake." "Star, what does that mean?" she asked. Before he could answer, a patroness burst through the wall. A silver otter, but twisted, its form flickering between shapes. It spoke in Harry's voice, yet not quite his. Hermione, don't trust the records. The prophecy archives have changed. Ginny never married me. Hermione staggered back. No, that can't be. It's not just the past we altered, Draco said quietly. It's the future. Every fix we made, something else unraveled. They ran through the ministry, past stunned employees who stared as if seeing ghosts. In the hall of prophecy, the shelves were rearranged. Row 15, where Harry's prophecy had once stood, now held a single orb labeled in elegant, unfamiliar script. Star the Chosen Weavers. Star. Hermione reached for it, but Draco caught her wrist. Last time you touched something without thinking, we ended up in 1890. She looked at him, then at their hands. He let go slowly, but didn't step back. Inside the orb a scene played, not of fire or battle, but of a quiet room in Hogwarts. Themselves older, standing side by side before a loom made of starlight and shadow. Threads of gold and silver wove between their fingers, connecting not just to the tapestry, but to each other. They're showing us, she breathed. Draco exhaled sharply. We're not just fixing history, we're part of it. Outside a distant bell tolled, 12 times, though it was only midday. The air shimmered again, and for a heartbeat, Hermione saw a second sun rise over the Thames. The candlelight in the Department of Mysteries flickered, casting long shadows across the obsidian floor. Hermione stood before the tapestry, her fingers hovering just above its pulsing surface, not daring to touch. Threads of silver and crimson shimmered like liquid metal, shifting in slow, deliberate waves, as though breathing. She had corrected the first breach, restored the moment when young Cedric Diggory had been pulled into the Triwizard Maze alone, without the interference of a cloaked figure who had never existed. It should have been simple. It should have been clean. But magic was never clean. She pressed a hand to her temple. The morning's prophet had arrived with headlines that made her stomach twist. Ministry announces new apparition regulations, effective immediately. That wasn't right. Apparition permits had always been regulated, yes, but not with such draconian penalties for splinching. And then there was the owl from Ginny, brief, confused, mentioning a Quidditch match at Hogwarts that had never happened in this version of the year. The Gryffindor team had played in November, not October, and Neville had earned head boy in their 7th year. But now, according to the updated school records she'd discreetly accessed, it was Ernie Macmillan. Her breath hitched. Small changes. Insignificant on the surface. But the tapestry didn't lie. It showed them now, tiny fractures branching outward from the point where Cedric's path had been altered. A single thread tugged unraveling patterns decades in the making. Draco stood a few paces behind her, arms crossed, his jaw tight. So what? We fix one thing, and suddenly Flitwick's teaching Muggle studies. It's not that simple, she whispered, eyes tracing a new gold thread curling around the image of Hogwarts' West Tower. Magic has memory. History isn't linear here. It's a woven thing. Pull one thread, and the whole design shifts, sometimes in ways we can't predict. He stepped closer, his boots silent on the stone. Then maybe we stop pulling threads. She turned to him, the candlelight catching the storm in her eyes. And let the tapestry keep rewriting itself. Let Malfoy family crests appear in prophecies that never named you. No, we don't get to choose when history needs fixing, Draco. We just have to face the consequences. He flinched, almost imperceptibly, at the use of his first name. They hadn't been easy, these works working side by side, hours spent deciphering runes stitched in forgotten tongues, stepping through shimmering portals woven into the fabric of time, watching their younger selves make choices they could no longer change. She had seen the boy who'd hesitated in the room of requirement. He had seen the girl who'd wiped her parents' memories without saying goodbye. A low hum vibrated through the air. The tapestry rippled, and the new image surfaced. London, but not as she knew it. Red double-deckers floated above cobbled streets, propelled by enchantments. Witches in Victorian garb argued with ministry officials over levitation permits. The skyline was crowded with spires that hadn't existed in her lifetime. That's not possible, Draco muttered. It's probable, she corrected. A branching timeline, one where the statute of secrecy was never fully enforced, where magic bled into the Muggle world earlier, differently. And this is because Cedric lived? No, because someone who shouldn't have touched him did. Because we removed a moment of betrayal that in its own twisted way set other events in motion. Harry's resolve, his rage after the graveyard, shaped how he fought in the war. Without that, everything softens, or breaks. Draco stared at the image, his reflection fractured in the silken weave. So what do? Hermione exhaled slowly. We watch, we learn. And we accept that some ripples can't be undone. All we can do is ensure the core threads remain intact. The war ended, Voldemort fell, love survived. He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment, the tapestry faded into the background. And us? She didn't answer right away, but in the shifting threads, deep within the weave, two strands, once distant opposing, had begun to twist together, glowing faintly, stubbornly, against the dark. The air in the Wisengamot chamber tasted of old parchment and cold stone, thick with the weight of decisions not yet spoken. Hermione sat rigid in the front row, her fingers curled tightly around a quill that had long run dry. Around her, the circular hall hummed with low, urgent voices, some sharp with ambition, others hushed in calculation. The enchanted ceiling above flickered between storm clouds and a pale, uncertain dawn, mirroring the unsettled mood below. At the center of the chamber, suspended in mid-air by ancient magic, hung a shimmering fragment of the tapestry, a single section depicting a future where the ministry hovered like a gilded cage over the threads of time, regulating prophecy, policing history. It cannot remain unregulated, thundered Counselor Thorne, a wiry man with eyes like flint. If the tapestry continues to rewrite itself without oversight, who's to say it won't unravel the foundation of our laws, our lineage? Our very identity? A murmur of agreement rippled through the conservative bloc. Draco, seated beside Hermione with his usual air of restrained disdain, exhaled sharply through his nose. Oh, for Merlin's sake, he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. They're not afraid of the tapestry changing. They're afraid it might tell the truth. Hermione glanced at him. His jaw was tight, but his eyes, pale gray and startlingly clear, were fixed on the image above. In it, a younger version of Lucius Malfoy stood at the edge of a great magical rift, his face half obscured by shadow, his hands outstretched toward a thread that pulsed crimson. She hadn't seen that moment in the full tapestry, not yet, but she could guess what it meant. The Department of Mysteries has always operated outside public scrutiny, she said, rising to her feet. Her voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. But this is not a matter of bureaucracy. The tapestry isn't just showing the future, it's alive. It reacts to interference. Every attempt to control it risks distorting the very events we're trying to understand. And yet, countered Lady Selwyn, her voice smooth as poison honey, you and Mr. Malfoy have been granted unrestricted access. How do we know you aren't shaping its visions to suit your own narrative? A Gryffindor and a Malfoy, of all unlikely pairs, wandering through time, altering the past. Forgive us if we find that troubling. Draco stood slowly, his movements deliberate. If I wanted to reshape history, I'd have done it years ago. My family had its chance, and lost. He paused, then added, quieter, this isn't about legacy, it's about survival. The tapestry isn't just showing what could be. It's showing what must be prevented. A silence fell. Even the ceiling stilled, the clouds freezing in place. Hermione turned back to the council. The portals within the tapestry, they're not just windows, they're anchors. Each time we step through, we feel the weight of consequence. I've seen what happens when a thread is pulled too hard. I've watched a version of myself vanish because she tried to save someone she wasn't meant to save. Her voice wavered just once. We're not rewriting fate, we're mending it. And who decides what's broken? Asked a younger wizard from the reformist wing. That's the point, Hermione said softly. No one should. The tapestry reveals, it doesn't decree. To control it would be to silence it. Draco looked at her then, really looked, at the shadows beneath her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she lowered them to her sides. She's right, he said, his voice low but carrying, and if you try to chain it, you'll break something far older than your authority. The chamber remained still. No one moved. No one spoke. Outside, thunder rolled across the London sky, distant but insistent, like a warning carried on the wind. The air in the Department of Mysteries hummed with a quiet electric tension, the kind that settled beneath the skin-like static before a storm. Hermione stood close to the edge of the vast suspended tapestry, her fingers hovering just above its surface, not quite touching. It had been 3 days since the first thread, gold, pulsing like a heartbeat, had unraveled from the weave, tugging them into a forgotten corridor beneath Hogwarts during their 5th year, where a whispered betrayal had nearly cost Luna Lovegood her life. Now another thread shimmered into view, this one silver, cool and luminous, spiraling gently from the fabric, as though exhaled by the tapestry itself. "It wasn't there a moment ago," Draco murmured, stepping closer. He wore his ministry robes now, tailored in charcoal gray, but his posture still carried the guarded stiffness of someone who didn't belong. His eyes, pale and sharp, followed the thread's length as it coiled mid-air, pointing toward a section of the tapestry depicting a moonlit courtyard, Hogwarts, but not as they knew it. The whomping willow stood still, its branches drooping like willow trees were meant to, and the castle's towers bore unfamiliar sigils. "No," Hermione agreed softly. "It wasn't." She reached out, and the silver thread quivered, then drifted towards her hand. It didn't burn, didn't sting. Instead, it felt like moonlight given form, cool and faintly magnetic. "It's showing us another moment, another place. And if we follow it?" Draco asked, voice low. "Do we really trust this thing?" Hermione glanced at him. There was suspicion in his tone. Yes, but also something else. Curiosity, the quiet kind, that only comes when pride is slowly being worn down by wonder. "We don't have a choice," she said. The first thread changed something. We saw it. The timeline adjusted. Luna remembered the attack, but the others, they don't. It's as if it never happened. This tapestry isn't just showing us history. It's correcting it. He exhaled through his nose, a dry, humorless sound. Of course you'd call it a correction. To someone else, it might have been justice. She didn't answer that. They both knew what he meant. The moment in the tapestry's first vision, when younger Draco had hesitated before casting a curse meant for her. That hesitation had altered everything. She had seen it in his eyes, even then. Conflict, not cruelty. And now, here they stood, bound by threads no one else could see. The silver filament pulsed, beckoning. "Hold on," Hermione said, and before Draco could protest, she grasped the thread. The world dissolved. They landed on damp stone. The scent of blooming nightshade thickened the air. The moon hung low, and full above the astronomy tower, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Students, familiar faces, but younger, lingered near the fountain, laughing. Hermione's breath caught. She recognized herself at 17, wrapped in a thick cloak, arguing in hushed tones with Ron. But it wasn't their voices that chilled her. It was the figure watching from the shadows near the herbology annex. Neville Longbottom, but not as she remembered him. He stood rigid, face pale in the moonlight, wind clenched in his hand. And in front of him, Professor Trelawney, collapsed, her shawl tangled around her limbs, muttering in a voice that wasn't her own. "The serpent weaves through shadowed halls," she rasped, "and the blood of the unwilling shall open the way." Hermione turned sharply to Draco. "That's not—" "No," he said, jaw tight. "That's not Trelawney's prophecy." And then Neville raised his wand, not in defense, but in incantation. The silver thread glowed brighter, winding around Hermione's wrist, like a warning. They had stepped into a night that never was. And something, was trying to make it real. Rain lashed against the Ministry of Magic's shattered atrium. Its golden statues toppled like forgotten gods. Water pooled around the cracked fountain where the statue of the witch and wizard once stood, now reduced to rubble, their staves broken, faces chipped into grimaces. Hermione Granger crouched behind the remnants of a marble column, her breath shallow, wand clenched in trembling fingers. The air smelled of damp stone and burnt ozone, the hum of unstable magic prickling across her skin. She turned her head slowly, eyes searching the shadows. Draco Malfoy knelt beside her, his usual composure frayed. His cloak was torn at the shoulder, his hair matted with soot. He didn't speak, but his gaze flickered to hers, sharp, wary, asking without words if she was ready. "This isn't right," Hermione whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant echo of footsteps. "The Ministry didn't fall until after Dumbledore. This is months too soon." Draco exhaled through his nose. Then someone changed it, and we're stuck in the middle of it. They had stepped through the tapestry only moments ago, Hermione tracing the shimmering thread of Draco's crest, winding into a prophecy about the fall of the Ministry, Draco cursing as the fabric pulled them in like a riptide. Now they stood, or rather, hid, in a world rewritten. No Aurors patrolled the halls. Instead, black-robed enforcers, their faces masked, moved in disciplined formation, wands raised, casting detection spells that rippled the air like heat over stone. Hermione pressed a hand to the cold floor, feeling the faint vibration of magic beneath. There's a suppression ward active, strong, it's dampening wand power. That's why spells feel sluggish. Draco flexed his fingers, testing his wand. Useless unless we get close. They're hunting for resistance signatures. Probably think we're part of the Order. We are, she said, grim. Or we will be, but not yet. Not here. A burst of light flared at the far end of the atrium. Two enforcers dragged a man in tattered robes between them, his head hanging. Hermione recognized him. Kingsley Shacklebolt, younger, blood trickling from his temple. Her stomach twisted. They captured him before he could warn the Order, she breathed. If he's taken, Dumbledore won't know about the prophecy. Snape won't have his orders. Everything unravels. Draco watched, jaw tight. You're thinking we have to free him. I'm thinking we have to make sure history remembers him alive, she said. But we can't change too much. One wrong move, and the Tapestry might reject us. Or worse, erase us. He shot her a sidelong glance. Since when are you afraid of changing things? Since I realized we're not just fixing history, she said quietly. We're walking through our own ghosts. That man, Kingsley, he trusted me once. I can't let him die because we were too careful. Draco didn't answer at first. Then, softly, my father's probably one of the ones giving orders. She looked at him. And that matters. It matters, he admitted. Because if I see him, I don't know what I'll do. The footsteps grew louder. Patrols converging. Hermione pulled a small vial from her robes. Theratasserum, conjured from memory. We won't have to fight them. We'll make them tell us where they're taking Kingsley. Truth is the most dangerous spell in war. Draco almost smiled. Still clever, Granger. Always, she said, and slipped into the shadows. They moved like whispers through the ruined halls, following the drag marks on the marble, the faint trail of blood. At a junction, Hermione pressed a hand to the wall. Ancient wards, twisted and corrupted, pulsed beneath her palm. She murmured a countercharm, just loud enough to disrupt the surveillance enchantments for 12 seconds. That's all we get, she said. Draco stepped forward. Then, let's make it count. They found the holding chamber beneath the old Wizengamot courtroom. 3 enforcers guarded the door. Hermione flicked her wand, silent, precise. A jet of silver thread shot out, wrapping around the nearest man's ankle. He yelped as he was yanked off balance. Draco lunged, disarming the second before he could raise his wand. The third turned. Hermione shattered the vial at his feet. The mist rose. The enforcer inhaled and froze. "Where is the prisoner?" Hermione asked, voice calm. The man blinked, slow, down. The spiral stairs, cell 7. They're preparing him for transfer to Azkaban at dawn. Draco exhaled. Down. That's all we need. Hermione met his eyes. Then we'd better make sure the sun rises on the right world. Rain lashed against the cracked stained glass of the great hall, its fractured panes casting jagged shadows across the stone floor like broken promises. The air smelled of damp stone and something sharper, ozone, and the faint metallic tang of blood. Hermione pulled her cloak tighter, fingers brushing the hilt of her wand. This was not the Hogwarts she remembered. The banners overhead were wrong. Silver and green dominated, entwined with serpentine motifs that pulsed faintly, as if breathing. The house tables had been rearranged, Slytherins elongated, elevated on a dais, while the others huddled beneath it like supplicants. And the students, pale-faced, eyes downcast, moved through the hall with a silence that curdled the air. "This is my 7th year," Draco whispered, voice raw, but not as it was. She turned to him. His face was ashen, jaw clenched so tight, a muscle flickered beneath the skin. He wasn't the man she'd grown to respect over late-night research in the Department of Mysteries. He was a ghost, staring at a life he'd narrowly escaped. You didn't join them, she said softly. In our time you hesitated. You looked away when they tortured people. You didn't cast the curse. But here I did. He stepped forward, boots echoing in the hollow silence. Here, I chose power over fear, over shame. A door creaked open at the far end of the hall. 2 figures entered, familiar, yet alien. Younger versions of themselves. Hermione's breath caught. Her younger self was thinner, her hair wilder, her robe singed at the hem. There were ropes around her wrists, spelled shut, with blackened chains that writhed like eels. And walking beside her, wand raised, eyes cold and certain, Draco. Not the boy who'd trembled under the weight of his father's legacy, but a young man who had embraced it. He's taken the mark, Draco murmured. Early, voluntarily. Hermione swallowed. And you reported me. The younger Draco spoke, voice clear and cutting. Mudblood found it tempting to sabotage the astronomy tower wards. She was with Potter. We got her before she could escape. A murmur rippled through the hall. No one moved to help. No one even looked up. This isn't just a changed war, Hermione whispered. It's a conquered one. Draco closed his eyes. After Dumbledore died, after I let them into the school, I didn't stop. I convinced myself it was survival, then necessity, then pride. She reached for his hand without thinking. He flinched, then stilled, fingers curling around hers, cold and trembling. We have to reach her, Hermione said. The younger me, if we can show her another way. She won't believe us, he snapped. Not with proof in front of her. Look at me, look at what I became. But Hermione stepped forward anyway, wand raised, shielding charm forming between them and the dais. Then we give her proof, not words. Action. A flicker of something crossed Draco's face. Doubt, yes, but beneath it the faintest ember of hope. They moved like shadows through the hall, avoiding patrols of older Slytherins wearing Death Eater insignias as fashion. The dungeons were colder, the torches dimmer. The air tasted of iron and despair. They found the cell where younger Hermione was being held. Stone walls, no window, a single rune-etched door. Draco stopped before it. I stood guard here once, for hours, listening to her scream, pretending I couldn't hear. Hermione looked at him. Not anymore. Together they broke the seal. Inside, the girl looked up, chained to the wall, one eye swollen shut, but her gaze, fierce, unbroken, locked onto them. Who are you? A second chance, Draco said, voice breaking, and a warning. Outside, alarms began to wail. Red light pulsed through the cracks in the stone. They didn't have long. Hermione stepped forward and held out her hand. Trust us, or don't. But come with us now, or you die here, alone, afraid, and believing the world has no mercy. The girl hesitated, then reached out, and as their fingers touched, the tapestry in the Department of Mysteries shivered, one thread glowing brighter than the rest. The air inside the tapestry's portal tasted of dust and old ink, thick with the residue of rewoven time. Hermione stepped forward first, her wand alight with a soft blue shimmer that pulsed like a heartbeat. Behind her, Draco adjusted the cuff of his sleeve with deliberate precision, as if smoothing away the lingering unease of stepping through magic older than Hogwarts. This had better not be another dead end, he murmured, glancing at the shifting silks around them. They hung in impossible layers, glowing faintly with threads of silver and deep crimson, the colors of a timeline fraying at the edges. It's not, Hermione said, her voice low but certain. She ran her fingers along a seam in the fabric, feeling the subtle tremor beneath. The resonance is stronger here. We're close. They had come to a moment suspended between memory and event, the eve of the International Confederation of Wizards' vote on magical isolationism, a turning point nearly 50 years past. The tapestry had shown it wrong. A single speech altered, a delegate swayed by whispered words, never meant to be spoken. That one deviation had unraveled decades of cooperation, leading to fractured alliances and a weakened magical world. Proof enough that even whispers could reshape history. And tonight, that whisper would happen again, unless they stopped it. Ahead, the threads parted like a curtain, revealing a dimly lit corridor in what looked like the Ministry's old auditorium complex. A witch in deep violet robes paced near a water fountain, her brow furrowed. Althea Greengrass, grandmother to Daphne and Astoria, Draco's own grandmother by marriage, though he rarely spoke of her. She was meant to vogue for unity, but in the corrupted thread, she had been convinced otherwise by a man in grey, a man who shouldn't have been there at all. "That's him," Draco said quietly, pointing to a shadowed alcove where a figure waited, hands clasped behind his back. Cassius Knott. He died in Azkaban before this meeting ever took place. Not in this version, Hermione whispered. Someone pulled him forward, or kept him alive through dark means. Either way, he's here to sway her. They couldn't interfere directly. The Tapestry's rules were clear. They could observe, guide, nudge, but never force. Time resisted overt manipulation. A heavy hand would snap back like a snapped thread, possibly unraveling them with it. So they had to be subtle. Hermione reached into the small satchel at her side and withdrew a vial of liquid light, the essence of a memory, preserved in enchanted glass. It shimmered with the voice of Althea's late husband, urging her to trust her own judgment, not the echoes of old grudges. It was a recording they'd found in the Department of Mysteries, one that had never been played for her in the original timeline. "We need her to hear it," Hermione said. "But not from us." Draco studied the space. "There's a resonance plate beneath the fountain. Old monitoring charm. If we trigger it, the sound might carry just enough." They moved in silence, weaving around the edges of the scene like ghosts. Hermione uncorked the vial and let a single drop fall onto the stone lip of the fountain. Draco tapped his wand against the base, once, twice, and muttered an incantation so old it left frost on the air. Then they waited. Althea paused in her pacing. A faint echo rose from the stones. A man's voice, gentle and worn with time. "Star, you've always seen farther than the rest of us, Althea. Don't let fear of the past decide the future. Star." She stilled. Her fingers curled around the locket at her throat, her husband's locket. Across the hall, Cassius Knott stepped forward, smiling with false warmth. "A word. Madam Greengrass, the future of our world hangs in the balance." She turned to him, eyes sharp now, unclouded. "It does, and I've just remembered who I'm fighting for." She walked past him without another word. The tapestry behind them shivered. A single thread, once dark and knotted, brightened, gold weaving through it, like dawn breaking over a storm. Hermione exhaled. It worked. Draco watched the seam dissolve into light, his expression unreadable. "She was strong," he said at last. "Didn't need us, just a reminder." Hermione looked at him. Sometimes that's all anyone needs. He met her gaze, and for a moment, the years between them, the taunts, the war, the silence, felt like nothing more than frayed edges waiting to be rewoven. The tapestry pulsed gently, pulling them back. The fire in the Department of Mysteries observation chamber crackled low, casting long, trembling shadows across the stone walls. Hermione sat on the edge of the cold marble bench, her fingers still trembling slightly as she pressed a healing salve to a shallow gash on her forearm. The air smelled of burnt thread and ozone, remnants of the unraveling portal they'd barely escaped. Draco stood by the tapestry's frame, one hand braced against the obsidian arch, his face half-lit in flickering amber. He hadn't spoken since they'd returned. "That was too close," Hermione finally said, voice quieter than she intended. "Another few seconds, and we'd have been pulled into the backlash loop." Draco exhaled, a slow, measured breath. "You always say that, every time, as if stating the obvious makes it less true." She looked up at him, frowning. "I'm not trying to make it less true. I'm trying to process it. That's what people do when they almost die." He turned then, his gray eyes finding hers. There was no sneer, no familiar barb waiting on his tongue. Just weariness. "We didn't almost die, Granger. We should have. That stitch in 1892, it wasn't supposed to react like that. Something's accelerating the decay." She set the salve down and rubbed her temples. "The timeline's fraying. Every correction we make seems to create a new tear somewhere else. It's like mending a sieve." A silence settled between them, heavier than the enchanted air around the tapestry. Outside, the ministry's lower levels hummed with distant footsteps and murmured spells. But here, it felt like the world had narrowed to just this room, this moment, the two of them breathing in time with the dying fire. Draco moved then, crossing to the bench and sitting at a careful distance. You shouldn't have gone through first back there. Hermione turned to him, surprised. I had the temporal anchor. You know the protocols. It's not about protocols, he said, voice low. It's about you always thinking you have to be the one to face it. The danger, the guilt, the weight of it all. You don't, she blinked, caught off guard. And you do? He looked down at his hands. My family's crest is woven into a future that doesn't exist yet. I'm not exactly free of guilt either, in case you hadn't noticed. I noticed, she said softly. I just didn't think you'd admit it. He gave a humorless half-smile. Funny what almost being erased from time will do to a man's honesty. She studied him, the sharp line of his jaw, the faint scar near his temple from the war, the way his hair fell just slightly over his brow now, less polished, more real. They hadn't spoken like this since Hogwarts, maybe never. Not without armor. I used to think you were just cruel, she said. Not complicated. And I thought you were insufferable, he replied, tilting his head. Still do sometimes. But not wrong, she laughed, a short, breathy sound that surprised them both. That's almost a compliment. It's as close as you'll get. Another pause. The fire popped. The thread in the tapestry shimmered faintly, as if responding to their quiet. I saw my younger self today, Hermione said, her voice softer now. In that memory of the library fire, she was so certain she could fix everything with books and logic. I wanted to tell her, it's not that simple. Draco watched her. And I saw mine, smug, afraid, pretending he knew which side he was on. I didn't hate him, I just pitied him. She turned to face him fully. Do you think we're fixing the past? We're just becoming the people who were always meant to. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a single silver thread, glowing faintly, the one they'd recovered from the 1892 rift. I think, he said, holding it between his fingers, that some threads were never meant to be pulled apart. Hermione looked at the thread, then at his hand, and for the first time didn't look away. The air in the Department of Mysteries was never still, but tonight it hummed with a low, almost subsonic thrum, as though the very walls were whispering secrets too old to name. Hermione stood before the vast tapestry, her fingers hovering just above its shimmering surface. Threads of silver and deep violet pulsed faintly, like veins beneath skin, shifting in patterns that defied logic. She had spent 3 sleepless nights cataloging the changes. Gryffindor's lion now bore a silver tear down its flank. Hufflepuff's badger held a wand that hadn't existed in the original records. And worst of all, the Malfoy sigil, a coiled serpent wreathed in frost, had appeared in a section labeled Star, the Coming Concord Star. It shimmered with a cold luminescence, as if woven not in thread, but in memory. She exhaled slowly, the warmth of her breath dissipating, before it could fog the glass case that housed the ancient tome she'd pulled from the restricted archives. Star Lunes of Divination, Weaving Time in Cloth and Prophecy Star. Cell 5, the spine cracked as she opened it, releasing a scent like dried herbs and ozone. The pages were brittle, written in a looping script that blended Latin, Old English, and symbols she didn't recognize. Yet her mind, trained by years of magical study, parsed fragments with startling clarity. Founders, she murmured, tracing a passage. Rowena Ravenclaw, Salazar Slytherin, and 3 seers of the Veil, commissioned the great loom beneath the ministry's foundation, to bind the threads of fate, lest chaos unravel history. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't just a record of events. It was a living mechanism. A corrective device. The tapestry wasn't merely showing what had been or might be. It was meant to balance star. A rustle echoed behind her. She didn't turn. You've been down here since yesterday afternoon, Granger. Draco's voice was cool, clipped, but under it, a thread of something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or unease. He stepped into the dim light, his pale robes catching the ambient glow of the tapestry. His eyes flicked to the book in her hands, then to the serpent on the fabric. That's my family's crest, but it's wrong. It's not in our ancestral records. It's not supposed to be, Hermione said, not looking up. Not yet. The tapestry is showing possible futures, ones that haven't happened. But now that your crest is here, you're tied to it. You're part of the weave. He scoffed, though his fingers twitched at his side, as if resisting the urge to touch the glass. "And you expect me to believe some dusty cloth decides my fate?" "No," she said, finally turning. "I believe its star records star fate, until it's altered. And someone is altering it. The threads are fraying in places. Look." She pointed to a section near the base, where the image of a young boy with messy black hair stood on a platform above a swirling abyss. "That's Harry at the Department of Mysteries, the night Sirius died." But the platform's edges are unraveling, the threads are snapping. Draco stepped closer, his breath catching. "That never happened, he didn't fall." "But it nearly did," Hermione whispered, "and the Tapestry remembers near misses. It holds the weight of choices not made." She turned the page. "Listen to this. Star the Weavers foresaw that time cannot be altered without consequence. Thus the loom was bound with blood oaths, each thread tied to a soul who bore witness." "Starred blood oaths," Draco's voice dropped. "You're saying someone has to die star to fix this?" "No," she said, softer now. "I'm saying the ones who live through these moments. They're the only ones who can mend them. And if the tapestry keeps unraveling, then so does reality. Memory, history, consequence. They'll all blur." He stared at her, the usual sneer absent. For the first time she saw not the boy who'd called her a mudblood, but the man who'd stood frozen in his drawing room while Death Eaters stormed his home. Who'd chosen in the end not to raise his wand. "So what do we do?" he asked. Hermione closed the book gently. "We find the first portal. It's in the tapestry, hidden in the weave, and we step through, to where it all began to fray. A single thread, gold and trembling, detached from the fabric, and curled toward her hand like a vine seeking sunlight. She didn't pull away. The air in the Department of Mysteries was thick with the scent of old parchment and cold stone, but the tapestry pulsed now with a low rhythmic hum, like the breathing of some great slumbering beast. Hermione stood before it, fingers hovering just above the shimmering surface, tracing the path of a newly emerged thread, deep indigo, edged in gold, twisting like a river through the fabric of time. It pulsed once, sharply, and she recoiled, her breath catching. "It's not just showing the past," she murmured. "It's alive." Draco stepped closer, his usual sneer absent, replaced by wary fascination. The thread had appeared beside his family crest, still flickering faintly in the weave, a silver serpent coiled around a starburst of ancient runes. He hadn't spoken of it since they'd first seen it, but Hermione had noticed how often his gaze flickered toward it, as if afraid it might vanish, or worse, grow. "It's pulling," he said suddenly, voice low. "Can you feel that?" She nodded. A pressure built behind her ribs, subtle but insistent, like the first tug of a current beneath still water. The indigo thread flared, and the tapestry opened. Not a tear, but a seamless parting, like curtains drawn aside by unseen hands. Through it mist swirled, shot through with amber light. "Hogwarts," Draco breathed. Not the Hogwarts they knew, not stone towers and moving staircases, but something wilder, older. The scent of damp earth and wood smoke reached them first. Then the sound of chanting, deep and resonant, in a language that twisted oddly in the ears. Hermione stepped through first, her wand already in hand. Draco followed, and the world snapped into focus. They stood on a rise above a valley cradled by mist-laced hills. Below, 4 figures stood in a rough circle, their robes flowing like living flame. One raised a staff that blazed with emerald light, Salazar Slytherin. Another, a woman with eyes like polished amber, held a chalice that shimmered with liquid gold, Rowena Ravenclaw. Godric Gryffindor stood tall and broad, a sword unsheathed at his side, while Helga Hufflepuff knelt, hands pressed to the soil, whispering to the earth itself. "This is the binding," Hermione whispered. "The moment they wove the school's magic into the land." Draco stared, transfixed. "My ancestor is out there." She glanced at him. His face was pale, not with fear, but with something deeper. Awe, perhaps, or dread. He had grown up on stories of Slytherin's greatness, but this was raw, unfiltered. The air thrummed with power, and the magic here wasn't neat. Refined spells. It was primal, wild, older than books or rules. Then the ground trembled. A rift split the circle, not in the earth, but in the fabric between moments. A shadow surged from it, dark and formless, and the chanting faltered. Rowena staggered back, her chalice cracking. The shadow reached for Salazar, whispering in a voice like rusted iron. Hermione didn't hesitate. "We have to stabilize the weave. They can't complete the binding if the rift spreads." Draco grabbed her arm. "If we interfere, we change everything. My family, your parents, none of us might exist." She met his eyes. "Or the school never forms, and Voldemort wins by default." He swallowed, then nodded once. "Then we do it fast." They ran down the slope, wands raised. Hermione cast a shield of golden light, intercepting the shadow's lunge. It hissed, recoiling, but the rift widened. Draco stepped forward, his wand trembling slightly. "I know your blood," he said, voice steady now. "I am Slytherin's heir. You do not belong here." The shadow wavered. For a heartbeat, it seemed to recognize him. Then Hermione wove a counterspell, not from any book, from the Tapestry's memory, from the thread that had brought them here. Light spiraled from her wand, stitching the rift closed like a needle, pulling silk through cloth. The world stilled. The founders turned, startled, but the moment passed. They saw nothing. The binding resumed. The magic settled into the land. Hermione exhaled. "It's done." Draco stood frozen, staring at the spot where the shadow had been. "It knew me," he said quietly. "Not as Draco Malfoy, as something older." She touched his arm. Maybe some threads were meant to be followed. Above them, unseen, the tapestry shimmered. A new pattern formed, 2 threads, once distant, now braided together in gold and silver, winding toward a future not yet written. The air in the great hall shimmered, like heat above stone, thick with candlelight and the scent of roasted boar, mead and damp earth. Hermione stumbled forward, catching herself on a long wooden bench as the world stitched itself back into focus. Her fingers pressed into the rough-hewn grain, real and solid, and the hum of ancient magic still buzzed beneath her skin, like a plucked harp string. Beside her, Draco exhaled sharply, his white blonde hair catching the torchlight in soft, unexpected gold. "This can't be real," he muttered, eyes wide as they swept the hall. "This isn't Hogwarts, not as we know it." And he was right. The ceiling wasn't enchanted with stars. It was open to the night sky, a spill of silver constellations dusting the stone rafters. The walls were rough, unpolished stone, and torches flickered in iron brackets, shaped like serpents and lions, their flames casting long, dancing shadows. Long tables stretched before them, crowded with figures in heavy wool and fur-trimmed cloaks, their voices rising in laughter, psalm, and debate. Hermione's breath caught. "It's the Founder's Feast, the first one, year 993. Draco turned to her, brow arched. "You've read about this." "In a banned text from the restricted section," she said, voice low. "It was said to be myth. A gathering where Slytherin, Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, and Hufflepuff pledged to build a school for all magical children, regardless of blood." He gave a dry laugh. "And we all know how that turned out." They moved cautiously down the hall, keeping to the edges, their modern robes drawing curious glances. Hermione tugged her hood lower. A serving witch passed with a platter of steaming pheasant, and the aroma made her stomach twist with sudden, aching hunger. But they couldn't eat, couldn't linger. The Tapestry had flung them here for a reason. Something had gone wrong. Then she saw them. At the high table, 4 figures sat side by side. Rowena Ravenclaw leaned forward, her dark eyes alight with passion as she gestured toward a scroll. Helga Hufflepuff passed a bowl of stew to a young boy with muddy boots, her smile warm as hearthfire. Godric Gryffindor stood, red-haired and broad-shouldered, raising a goblet with a booming laugh, and beside him, Salazar Slytherin. He was not the cold, calculating man of legend. Not yet. His dark eyes were sharp. Yes, but they held warmth as he exchanged a rare smile with Godric. Their arms brushed as they leaned close, speaking in low tones. Allies, friends. Hermione's chest tightened. They were close once. Draco watched them, silent. Hard to believe. Then Slytherin rose, unfolding to his full height, and the hall quieted. "Magic," he began, voice smooth and resonant, "is not a gift given equally. It is earned, homed. It flows strongest in those whose blood has carried it for generations." A murmur rippled through the hall. Podrick stood slowly. "And yet, Salazar, what of the orphan who conjures fire from sorrow? The farmer's child who speaks to snakes in dreams. Is magic not also in heart? Slytherin's jaw tightened. The heart can be misled, blood cannot lie. Hermione stepped forward without thinking. He wasn't always a bigot, he was afraid. Draco's voice was quiet beside her. They all were, of muggles, of exposure, of losing control. But this fracture, it started here, she whispered. The tapestry must have shifted this moment, made his fear into hatred too soon. A sudden gust extinguished half the torches. The air turned cold. At the high table, Slytherin and Gryffindor were now standing, faces inches apported, voices rising. Words like star betrayal, star and star reckless as star, cut through the hall, and then from the shadows near the entrance, a figure moved, hooded, cloaked in deep green, weaving a spell beneath their breath. Hermione felt it before she saw it, a thread of magic, dark and slick, snaking towards Slytherin's foot, coiling around his ankle like ivy. No, she breathed. Someone's star-tampering star, Draco, followed her gaze. Then they're rewriting history. On purpose. She looked at him, pulse racing. We stop it. Together. He met her eyes, and for the first time there was no sneer, no barrier, only understanding. They moved as one into the light. The air in the Department of Mysteries hung thick with the scent of old parchment and ozone, a familiar weight pressing against Hermione's shoulders as she stepped closer to the tapestry. It shimmered under the dim, sourceless light, its threads pulsing faintly like veins beneath skin. Just yesterday, the scene had shown the Battle of Hogwarts, Harry standing amidst the rubble, wand raised, flames licking the sky. Now the image had shifted. The rubble was gone. The castle stood whole, unscathed. Harry wasn't fighting. He was walking away, his back to Hogwarts, a silhouette swallowed by a horizon painted in gold and ash. Hermione's breath caught. That's not right. Draco stood a few paces behind her, arms crossed, gray eyes narrowed. You said it was unstable. Maybe it's just fraying. No, she said sharply, stepping forward. This is intentional. Look at the weave. These threads are too precise. They're not unraveling. They're being rewoven. She reached out, hesitating just before touching the surface. The last time she'd pressed her palm to the tapestry, she'd been pulled into the Yule Ball of 1994, watching her younger self laugh with Victor Crumb, Draco sulking near the punch bowl. She'd returned to find the tapestry, subtly altered. The Weasley twins were absent from the frame, replaced by unfamiliar faces in Hufflepuff colors. She'd fixed it, returned the twins to their rightful place. But now, something deeper was wrong. Her fingers brushed the fabric. A jolt ran up her arm, not painful, but insistent, like a pulse from another heart. The image rippled. For a fleeting second, she saw a hand, pale, long-fingered, pulling a silver thread taut within the weave. Then it vanished. She jerked back. Someone's in there. Draco stepped forward, voice low. What? Not star and star the tapestry. Star inside, star the moments. Someone else is traveling through it. Just like we are. He exhaled sharply. That's impossible. The enchantments only respond to bloodline markers. You have yours. He glanced at the small crescent-shaped scar on her wrist, a mark left by the tapestry's initial claim. And mine's on my shoulder. No one else should be able to navigate it. Unless they found another way in, she murmured, already moving to the edge of the frame. She ran her fingers along the border, where ancient runes flickered in and out of sight. Or unless they've been here all along. The cold draft curled through the chamber, though there were no doors, no windows. The tapestry shivered. Then in a lower corner, a new thread emerged, black, shot through with green. It wove itself into the scene of the unbroken Hogwarts, curling around the castle's tallest tower like ivy. Hermione recognized the pattern. It was the Malfoy crest. Draco saw it too. His jaw tightened. That's not mine. Are you sure? I'd know if I'd been here, he snapped. I haven't touched this thing since we started. And I certainly wouldn't leave that star behind. Hermione studied the symbol. It was almost identical to Draco's family mark, but not quite. The serpent's eyes were red, not silver. The motto beneath was different. Star tempus vincit omnia star. Time conquers all, not your crest, she whispered, but someone who wants us to think it is. Draco's voice dropped. Or someone who star knows star will doubt each other. Silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. The trust between them, star as a wire. The trust between them, fragile at best, creaked under the weight of suspicion. They had been careful, methodical, restoring moments they'd witnessed. Dumbledore's army training in the Room of Requirement. The first Quidditch match between Gryffindor and Slytherin. Each return had left the Tapestry more stable. But now someone was undoing their work, or worse, using their corrections as cover. Hermione turned to him. We need to go back, to the beginning. The first alteration we fixed, the Yule Ball. If they've been following us, that's where they'd start. Draco nodded, though his eyes remained guarded. And if we find them, then we find out who's rewriting time, she said, hand returning to the tapestry. And why they're using star to hide it. The fabric glowed beneath her touch. The world tilted. The chamber dissolved, and somewhere deep within the threads, unseen hands pulled another strand taut. The air in the Hall of Prophecy hummed with a low, dissonant thrum, like a chord struck on a broken instrument. Dust motes swirled in the slanted light from the high arched windows, catching in the static charge that clung to the edges of the tapestry. Hermione pressed her fingertips to the woven surface, feeling the unnatural warmth beneath. Threads pulsed faintly, golds deepening into crimson, sapphire fraying into ash. The image of Hogwarts as it stood in 1998 now flickered with a second version, battlements intact, the great hall whole, students in pristine robes filing into a courtyard where no battle had ever been. It's not random, Draco murmured, circling the tapestry like a hawk, scenting weakness. His voice was quiet but edged with the sharpness of someone used to reading between lines. Look at the transitions. They're strategic. Hermione turned, frowning. What do you mean? He stopped, pointing at a section where the Ministry's gilded dome shivered, then reformed with a serpent crest coiled above its entrance. That's not sentiment. That's symbolism. Whoever's doing this isn't just erasing pain, they're installing order. A specific kind of order. She stepped closer, studying the threads. You think it's political? I know it is, he said, voice low. The changes aren't about happiness. They're about control. Look, no rebellion at Hogwarts, no Dumbledore's army, no Order of the Phoenix. But the Ministry remains intact, stronger, unchallenged. His gray eyes flicked to hers, and certain families, mine for instance, appear more prominently in scenes that haven't happened yet. Hermione exhaled slowly. You're saying someone's rewriting history to elevate a particular regime, one that favors pure blood dominant. Draco's jaw tightened. Not necessarily. They're being clever. They're not covertly restoring old hierarchies. They're making it seem like stability won. Peace through authority. No messy resistance. No moral ambiguity. Just order. He tapped the serpent crest, but the symbols give it away. The serpent, the emphasis on bloodlines. The absence of Muggle-borns in key roles, or any roles. She traced a thread where her own graduation robe had faded into a simple gray dress. Name was face-blurred. A chill crept down her spine. This isn't just about power, she whispered. It's about erasure. Draco nodded. And the most dangerous kind, the kind that pretends it's progress. A silence settled, heavy with implication. Somewhere deep in the department, a glass orb rattled in its stand, as if stirred by unseen currents. Hermione turned back to the tapestry, her mind racing. We need to identify when the first deviation occurred. If we can pinpoint the origin point, we might find who initiated the change. Draco stepped beside her, his shoulder nearly brushing hers. Then let's follow the trail. Start with the most significant pivot, the fall of Voldemort. She glanced at him. You think someone prevented his rise? No, he said quietly. I think someone made him win, quietly. Not through war, but through influence, through alliances, through time. He pointed to a frayed edge where Tom Riddle stood not as a monster, but as a dignified minister of magic, shaking hands with a younger Lucius Malfoy. This isn't a victory of fear. It's a victory of legitimacy. And that takes planning, decades of it. Hermione's breath caught. So the culprit isn't just altering the past. They're using time to build a dynasty. Precisely. Draco's voice was cold now, stripped of irony. And they've been doing it for years, maybe generations. They're not a rebel. They're a strategist. Someone with access, patience, and motive. She turned to him. Who benefits from this version of history? He met her gaze, and for a moment there was no animosity, no old wounds, only two minds aligning. Someone who believes the world was better when blood dictated worth. Someone who still holds power, or wants to. Someone like your father, she asked, careful. Draco didn't flinch. Possibly, but he wouldn't have the vision for this. He'd want the glory, not the shadow work. He paused. But he wouldn't be the only one. There are families, ancient ones, who never truly accepted the new order. After the war. They've been waiting, biding time. Hermione stared at the tapestry, the threads shifting like slow breath. Then we're not just fixing history, she said. We're stopping a coup. Draco's lips thinned into something almost like a smile. Welcome to politics, Granger, the real kind. The torches lighting the tapestry chamber flickered, their light guttering as if under invisible pressure. Hermione's fingers tightened around her wand, her breath shallow. The air tasted of Berg silk and ozone, thick with the scent of unraveling enchantments. Before them the colossal tapestry, stretching from floor to vaulted ceiling, shivered like water touched by wind. Threads of silver and crimson pulsed, rewriting themselves in real time. The images of past battles, ancient treaties, and forgotten spells dissolving and reforming into something new, something wrong. It's accelerating, Draco murmured, his voice low, edged with something Hermione couldn't place. Fear, perhaps, or reluctant awe. He stood a few paces from her, his wand raised, eyes fixed on the crest now woven into the future quadrant. The silver serpent coiled around a phoenix, the Malfoy sigil entwined with something greater, something neither of them understood. Then the shadows moved. They moved from the corners of the chamber, not quite human, not quite shadow, figures wrapped in cloaks threaded with reversed ruse, their faces obscured by masks of polished bone. They moved in silence, gliding over the stone floor without sound, wands drawn but not yet spoken. Intruders, Hermione breathed, stepping forward. Protego Maxima. A dome of shimmering light erupted around them, in the tapestry, just as the first curse struck. Dark green, serpentine, dissolving into mist against the shield. Draco didn't hesitate. Reducto, left flank, he sapped, and the spell tore through the air, shattering the stone where one figure had been. But they were fast, unnaturally so, their movements synchronized like dancers in a deadly rite. They're not using standard incantations, Hermione said, her mind racing. That last one, it was Parseltongue structured, but inverted. Draco shot her a sharp look. You can understand that? No, felt it, like a counter-harmony. They're unraveling the tapestry's magic by singing against it. Another figure lunged, slashing the air with a dagger made of solidified shadow. Hermione deflected it with a quick Expelliarmus, but the weapon didn't fly free. It split into three, circling like vipers. Slytherin tricks, Draco muttered, stepping in front of her. Finite incantatum, now Granger. They cast together. Their voices clashed at first, hers precise, his drawling but steady, and the combined spell sputtered. But then, as if the tapestry itself demanded harmony, their magic found alignment. A pulse of gold-white light burst from their wands, converging mid-air. The shadowy daggers shattered. Two of the intruders staggered back, their masks cracking. Tapestry wrist. For a heartbeat, Hermione saw it. The Battle of Hogwarts, but altered. Harry falling, Voldemort standing tall, the Malfoy name emblazoned on the winning side. She gasped. They're trying to lock in a future, she said, horror dawning. One where they rewrite bloodlines, power, everything. Draco's jaw clenched. And I'm their key. Another wave surged forward. Spells flew. Crimson, violet, black, each one aiming not at them, but at the fabric of the tapestry itself. Hermione dropped to one knee, pressing her palm against the enchanted stone floor. The chamber's wards are linked to the Ministry's core, she said, eyes closed. But they're being bypassed through time anchors. We need to seal the breach now. Draco looked at her, then at the tapestry, at the image of his younger self hesitating in the room of requirement, at the thread that now pulsed with his name. Tell me what to do, he said. She met his gaze. "Trust me." He didn't smile, but he stepped beside her, shoulder to shoulder, and placed his wand tip against hers. "On 3, she whispered. And 1. The intruders screamed in unison, their voices rising in that terrible backward chant. 2. The tapestry groaned, threads snapping like violin strings. 3. Their voices joined, restituo fatis, and magic erupted not as fire or light, but as music, a single clear note that spread through the chamber like a heartbeat. The dome flared. The intruders were thrown back, their forms dissolving into smoke. The tapestry stilled, the threads slowed, the Malfoy crest dimmed, but did not vanish. Silence fell, broken only by their breathing. Hermione lowered her wand, trembling. Draco did not move for a long moment. "That," he said finally, "was entirely too close." She turned to him. "You trusted me." He looked away, toward the tapestry, where a new thread had begun to form. 2 figures, side by side, walking through a storm. "I didn't have a choice," he said, but his voice lacked its usual edge, and for the first time, she wondered if that was true. Rain fell in silvery sheets over Godric's Hollow, soaking the cobbled streets and pooling in the hollows of broken stone walls. The air smelled of damp earth and singed wood, the ghost of a recent curse still lingering like static. Hermione pulled her cloak tighter, the fabric heavy with moisture, and glanced at Draco beside her. His face was unreadable in the dim glow of the street lamps, their light flickering like dying candles. "This wasn't in any record," she murmured, stepping carefully over a shattered window frame. "The attack here, it was supposed to be contained to the Potter's house. But this is a whole street." Draco didn't answer at first. His eyes were fixed on a child's toy broomstick, snapped in half and half buried in the mud. He nudged it with his boot. "They didn't clean up," he said quietly. "Not really. They sealed the memories, covered it with stories. But the damage stayed." They had stepped through the 4th thread, a deep, shimmering seam of violet and ash-gray silk that pulsed like a heartbeat within the tapestry. One moment they were in the Department of Mysteries, the air thick with the hum of unraveling time. The next, they were here, in the trembling silence after the fall of Voldemort. The portal had deposited them near the edge of the village, where the magical wards still flickered erratically, like wounded birds. Hermione had immediately sensed the wrongness. The timeline here was frayed. The Potter's home stood intact, yes, and Harry had survived, but something deeper had been altered. The spellwork around the house was weaker, less complete, and the people, fewer had come forward to celebrate. Fewer tears had been shed. "It's not just about the Potters," Hermione realized, her voice low. "It's about hope. The defeat of Voldemort. It wasn't a triumph here. It was a retreat. A fluke." "People don't believe it's over," Draco exhaled sharply, "because it wasn't. Not really. In this thread he came back sooner, stronger." She turned to him surprised. "How do you know that?" He hesitated, then touched the left sleeve of his robe, where the dark mark would have been. "My father spoke of it once, in his sleep. A nightmare. Said the Dark Lord never truly fell the first time. That the night in Godric's Hollow was just a pause, a breath before the real war." Hermione studied him. The rain had plastered strands of pale hair to his forehead, and for a moment he looked younger, vulnerable. Not the smug boy from Hogwarts, nor the guarded mad she'd come to work beside, but someone caught between legacies. "We need to find the acre," she said, forcing herself back to the mission. "The point where the timeline diverged. It has to be here, close to the house." They moved forward, stepping over debris and patches of scorched grass. The Potter's home loomed ahead, its windows dark, but as they approached, a flicker of movement caught Hermione's eye. A figure wrapped in a tattered cloak, standing at the edge of the garden. It was a woman. Narcissa Malfoy. Hermione froze. Draco let out a sharp breath. She looked different, thinner, her face strained with grief, but undeniably her. And she wasn't alone. In her arms, wrapped in a blanket, was a baby. Not Harry. This child had pale, fine hair, almost white. "No," Draco whispered. "That's not possible." But Hermione understood in a single, shattering instant. In this thread, the prophecy had maimed another. Not Harry Potter, Draco Malfoy. And Narcissa had brought him here, to the very house where Voldemort had fallen, to ensure the curse would mark him too, to make him the chosen one. He was supposed to die, Hermione said, her voice trembling. But she saved him, rewrote the prophecy's outcome. Draco stared at his mother, at the child who should have been him. She didn't save me, he said, hollow. She buried me under a fate I never asked for. The tapestry had shown them more than history. It had shown them what might have been. And in that moment Hermione saw not an enemy, but a boy who had spent his life trying to outrun a shadow he was never meant to carry. The air in the Department of Mysteries hummed with a low, almost imperceptible vibration, like the breath of something ancient stirring beneath stone. Hermione's fingers traced the edge of the tapestry, where threads of silver and deep indigo shimmered unnaturally, refusing to settle. The fabric pulsed faintly, as though alive, a heartbeat woven in magic. She leaned closer, squinting at a section depicting the post-war reconciliation between the Ministry and several neutral magical factions. Centaurs, Vila, even a delegation of Icelandic trolls, their forms rendered in coarse, frost-colored yarn. "It's wrong," she murmured, more to herself than to Draco, who stood a few paces behind, arms crossed, his eyes wary. "What is?" he asked, voice low, cautious. "This accord," she said, pointing to a ribbon of crimson thread that snaked through the scene like a scar. "It wasn't signed this way. The centaurs never formally aligned with the Ministry. Not like this. They agreed to non-aggression, mutual respect of boundaries. Yes, but this." She tugged gently at the thread. It resisted, then gave with a soft snap strass, unraveling a few inches before knitting itself back together, but differently. Now the Vila bowed to a figure in ministerial robes, a gesture that had never happened. Draco stepped forward, his shadow falling across the tapestry. "You're saying someone changed history? Not the past? The consequence of it?" "Not just the past," Hermione said, turning to him. "The memory of it. The ripples. If this treaty was enforced, alliances shifted, power structures reorganized, and no one remembers the difference, except the tapestry." He exhaled sharply. "Then how do we know this star isn't the truth?" "Because I was there," she said. "I stood in the clearing at Thistledown when Firenze spoke for his herd. He said, 'Star, we do not serve, we observe. Star.' I remember his words. I remember the silence afterward. There was no bow. No pledge." Draco studied her face, the certainty in her eyes. For a moment the old walls between them flickered. Not gone, but thinned. "So someone rewrote peace as submission. Why? To weaken," she whispered. "To make allies into vassals. And if this was altered, what else was?" She reached into the tapestry, not touching the surface, but star between star the threads, where the air shimmered like heat above stone. Her fingers brushed something cool and elastic, a seam invisible to the eye. With a soft gasp, she pulled. The tapestry split open like a curtain, revealing a narrow corridor of shifting light, the walls lined with more woven scenes. A duel in a moonlit courtyard, a child placing a hand on a sorting hat, a silver doe leaping through snow. Portals, moments, stitched into time. Draco stared. "You can't be serious." "We have to go back," she said. "To the signing before the treaty is finalized. Before the spell takes root. And if we're seen, we'll be shadows," she said. "And we won't interfere, not directly. We just need to restore the truth." He hesitated, then nodded. "Lead the way, Granger." She stepped through first, the light swallowing her whole. Draco followed, and the tapestry sealed behind them with a sound like a sigh. They emerged in a forest clearing at dusk, the sky bruised with purple and gold. Around them representatives from various magical beings stood in loose circles, speaking in hushed tones. Hermione recognized the clearing, Thistledown, and there at the center stood Minister Shacklebolt, dignified in deep purple robes, and beside him, Firenze, his equine form gleaming under the fading light. But something was already wrong. A scroll unfurled in Shacklebolt's hands. Not the original draft, but one laced with golden thread, pulsing with enchantment. As he began to read, the words twisted in the air, bending toward obligation, towards fealty. Hermione's breath caught. They've already changed it. Draco's hand found her arm, pulling her behind a cluster of birch trees. We can't stop the reading, but maybe we can break the spell. She looked at him, surprised. You know counter-charms for treaty magic? I grew up watching my father forge alliances with blood oaths and binding ink, he said, his voice flat. I know how they work, and how they fail. She nodded. Then we need to reach the scroll before it's sealed. As Shacklebolt reached the final line, the air thickened, the golden thread flared, and Hermione moved. The air in the Hall of Prophecies hummed with a low discordant resonance, like a violin string plucked just slightly out of tune. Hermione stood before the vast tapestry, her fingers hovering inches from its shimmering surface. Threads of silver, crimson, and deep obsidian pulsed with unnatural life, shifting like eels beneath glass. Words dissolved and reformed. The chosen one bled into the banished air, and Harry's name flickered, replaced by a name that made her breath catch. Star, Draco Malfoy Star. Behind her, polished brutes clicked against stone, still gawking at the fabric of reality unraveling. Granger? How very on brand. She didn't turn. If you're quite finished being insufferable, perhaps you could actually help. Draco stepped beside her, his gray eyes scanning the tapestry, with a mixture of disdain and reluctant fascination. The Malfoy crest, argent serpent coiled around a thorned rose, now stitched itself into the lower corner, pulsing like a second heartbeat. It hadn't been there yesterday. None of this had. This isn't just altered history, you murmured, voice lower now, stripped of its usual smirk. It's rewriting lineage. My family's legacy is being inserted into moments we were never part of. The founding of St. Mungo's, the negotiation of the International Confederation's Statute of Secrecy. And it's using your ancestral knowledge to do it, Hermione said, turning to him. That's why you're here. The tapestry doesn't just change facts. It draws power from those it implicates. It's feeding on your bloodline's memory. He scoffed, but there was a flicker of unease in his gaze. And what? You think I should just star off or star up my family's secrets? My grandfather's journals are warded with curses that flay skin from bone. You don't have a choice, she said sharply. Look. She pointed to a section near the top. The Battle of Hogwarts. The tapestry showed Hogwarts whole unburned, the dark mark hovering over the astronomy tower. The figure in silver-trimmed black robes stood at its peak, wand raised in triumph. The face was blurred, but the crest on his chest was unmistakable. That's not me, Draco said, voice tight. I stood star against star him, in the end. And the tapestry knows that, Hermione replied. But it's twisting intent. It's using your name, your blood, to justify a future that never happened. If we don't correct the weave, star now, star, it won't just be history that changes. It'll be real. It'll be star now, star. A cold silence settled between them. The tapestry shifted again. A new thread emerged, golden this time, weaving through the image of the younger Draco, wand trembling in the astronomy tower. The thread connected to the present-day Draco, tugging at his sleeve like a living thing. He flinched. It's pulling from memory, Hermione whispered. From star, your star memory. The moments of choice, the ones where you hesitated, where you almost said no. That's what it's using to build this false future, Draco exhaled, long and slow. Then we go back, to the moment, and we fix it. She nodded. But not just any version of that night. We need the star truth star. The exact words, the exact emotion. The tapestry thrives on ambiguity. We starve it with precision. He gave her a sideways look. Since when did you understand weaving magic? Since I realized it's not unlike spellcraft, she said, pulling a fine silver needle from her robes. One forged from Rowena Ravenclaw's lost thimble, enchanted to stitch truth into falsehood. Intent, syntax, timing, all matter. Draco reached into his inner pocket and withdrew a small black-bound book, its edges traced in serpentine silver. My grandmother's memoir. She wrote it in a cipher. Only a Malfoy heir can read. It contains the true account of our family's dealings during the war. Not the lies we told the Ministry. Not the lies we told ourselves. Hermione stared at it. You'd really share that? He met her eyes, and for the first time there was no mask. If it keeps that future from happening, yes, But you'd better be right about this, Granger. Because if we fail, I won't just be remembered as a hero. I'll be remembered as the boy who broke the world. The fire in the Department of Mystery's auxiliary chamber flickered low, casting long, wavering shadows across the stone walls. Hermione sat cross-legged on the floor, a blanket of star chart parchment spread before her, tracing the shifting patterns of the tapestry's temporal threads with a quill that glowed faintly blue. Her fingers were smudged with ink, her hair escaping its usual restraint in soft, frizzy tendrils around her face. Draco leaned against the mantel, arms folded, watching her. He had returned from retrieving potions from St. Mungo's, selves for the burns they'd both sustained in the last jump, when the thread of 1996 had nearly unraveled on them. He hadn't said much since, but he'd handed her the vial without a sneer, without even a comment about her tendency to overwork. "You should sleep," he said, voice quiet, almost reluctant. "I will," she replied, not looking up. "Once I map the next junction. The thread to 1978 is unstable. Something's pulling it toward Hogwarts before the sorting. If we go in blind, we might land in the middle of a duel between Dumbledore and Grindelwald's Shadow Ages." He exhaled through his nose, a sound that might have been a laugh, if it hadn't been so weary. "You always did like planning for every possible disaster, and you always charged in regardless." "That kept me alive," he said simply. She glanced up then, catching the edge of a shadow in his gray eyes, the kind that didn't come from candlelight. She softened. "It did, and I suppose I wouldn't trust anyone else to jump into a fraying timeline with me." He looked startled, then quickly masked it with a tilt of his chin. "Don't get sentimental, Granger. We're not friends." "No," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "We're not." Silence settled again, but it was different now. Lighter, like the air after a storm. Outside, the ministry corridors were empty, the night deep and still. The tapestry loomed behind them, its surface shimmering faintly, images shifting in slow, silent motion. A younger Draco in the room of requirement, a younger Hermione with tears on her cheeks after the Yule Ball, the version of Harry who never faced Voldemort. Draco moved then, crouching beside her without asking. He pointed to a knot in the thread she'd been studying. This isn't a divergence point. It's a tether. Someone's anchoring the timeline from the other side." Hermione blinked. "You can see that?" "I grew up watching my father weave blood oaths into family heirlooms," he said flatly. "Certain patterns, they stick." She studied the knot again, then nodded slowly. "You're right. It's a binding. But whose?" He didn't answer, but his jaw tightened. She hesitated, then reached out, not touching him, but gently folding the edge of the blanket around his wrist where the sleeve had ridden up, revealing the faint, silvery scar of the dark mark. He didn't pull away. "It's not who you were," she said quietly. "Not anymore." He looked at her then, really looked, his gaze stripped of pride, of defense. "You've always had a habit of seeing people better than they see themselves." She laughed softly. "Not always. I misjudged you for years, and I gave you every reason to." Another silence. But this one wasn't heavy. It was full of things unsaid, of years between them, of choices rewritten and lives half understood. When she shivered, he wordlessly stood, fetched another blanket from the supply chest, and draped it over her shoulders. His fingers brushed her collarbone, brief and careful. "Sleep," he said again, softer this time. She nodded, finally rolling up the parchment. "Just don't disappear on me. We need to be ready at dawn." "I won't," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time, she believed him. The air in the Department of Mysteries had grown thick, almost syrupy, since the fifth thread emerged. It pulsed faintly, a black filament woven so tightly into the tapestry's fabric that it seemed to drink the light around it. Hermione knelt before the towering weave, her fingers hovering just above the thread, careful not to touch. It didn't shimmer like the others. It didn't hum. Its simply star was star, like a hole cut into reality, and stitched closed with something darker than shadow. "This wasn't here last night," she murmured, more to herself than to Draco, though he stood just behind her, arms crossed, his jaw tight. "No," he said, "and it feels wrong." She glanced back at him. His pale eyes reflected none of the usual sneer, none of the practiced detachment, only wariness, That unsettled her more than the thread itself. "We should document it first," she said, reaching for her satchel. "Photographs, notes." "If it changes while you're fumbling with your quill," he cut in, stepping forward. "It's star moving star, grooming, Granger. Look." She turned. The thread wasn't static. It pulsed. Yes, and now she saw it star creep star, a slow, sinuous crawl across the weave, like ink bleeding through parchment. And where it passed, the surrounding threads dimmed, their colors leaching away. "That's not possible," she whispered. "The tapestry records fixed moments. It doesn't evolve." "Then something's changing it," Draco said, voice low. "Or someone." A silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken memory. Their last jump through the fourth thread, into the Battle of Hogwarts, moments before the Room of Requirement collapsed, had left scars, not on their bodies, but on something deeper. They'd seen themselves then, younger, furious, broken. Draco, hesitating at the doorway while flames roared behind him, Hermione dragging Neville forward, not seeing. Neither had spoken of it since. No, this black thread twisted toward a section of the tapestry untouched by time, a blank quadrant, labeled only star, future unwoven star. "It's leading somewhere," she said slowly, "but not to a memory, not to a past moment, to a possibility then." He exhaled sharply. "One we've never lived." She stood, brushing dust from her robes. "We have to follow it." Draco's gaze snapped to her. "You're mad. This isn't like the others. It's not gold, not silver. It's star, void star. We don't know what it does. What if it unravels us? What if it unravels everything?" She countered. "If the tapestry is being altered, truly altered, then history isn't just being rewritten, it's being star-erased, star. We can't ignore this." He looked away, toward the archway, where the other threads hum like dormant vines. "You always did have a martyr complex, and you always looked for an escape." She shot back. "But you're still here." He didn't answer, but he didn't leave. Hermione reached into the folds of her robe and withdrew a slender silver needle, enchanted, charmed with truth-binding spells and temporal anchors. She pressed its tip gently against the black thread. It recoiled, not physically, but the air around it star-shuddered star. A low subsonic groan vibrated through the chamber, stirring the dust on the floor. The thread writhed, then split, not into two, but into three, each thinner, darker, branching like roots into the unknown. Draco grabbed her wrist. "Stop. You're waking it." She pulled back, heart hammering. "It's sentient?" "No," he said, though his voice wavered. "But something's using it, like a conduit." She looked at the new branches. One pointed toward a seam still forming. Smoke, a crumbling tower, a figure in silver robes falling. The second curled toward a quiet room, a book burning in a hearth. The third pointed directly at them, at their entwined hands on the tapestry's edge. At the faint, shimmering echo of a future that hadn't happened yet. Two names stitched side by side, names woven in a thread of deep impossible gold. Hermione sucked in a breath. Draco let go of her wrist as if burned. "We need to find out where this begins," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "before it finds us first." The air tasted different here, cleaner, sharper, like frost on stone. Hermione stumbled forward, her boots sinking slightly into soft silver moss that carpeted the ground. Around her, the world shimmered with a quiet luminescence, as though moonlight had been woven into the very air. Towering spires of white marble spiraled upward, fused with living trees whose leaves glowed faintly gold. The sky was a deep violet, streaked with slow-moving constellations that pulsed like breathing stars. Draco caught her arm before she could take another step. "Don't move," he whispered. His voice was taut, uncharacteristically cautious. "Look." She followed his gaze. Before them stretched a vast plaza paved in polished obsidian. At its center stood a statue, not of stone, but of enchanted light, shifting subtly with every breath of wind. It depicted a man in minister's robes, his sharp features softened by age, silver in his hair, and a quiet authority in his stance. Hermione's breath caught. It was Draco. Not the boy who'd sneered at her in potions class, nor the broken young man during the war, but someone older, wiser. A leader. That's impossible, she murmured. Draco stared at his own likeness, face unreadable. I don't remember becoming minister. You don't remember because it hasn't happened, she said, stepping closer, despite herself. Or, it might not happen. This is a possible future. The tapestry doesn't show what will be. It shows what could. He didn't answer. His eyes scanned the inscription beneath the statue. Star Draco Lucius Malfoy, Minister for Magic, 2042-2078. Star Architect of the Unified Magical Accord. Restorer of the Archives. First Minister to open the Department of Mysteries to public trust. Hermione exhaled slowly. You ended secrecy, didn't you? Opened everything, even the unspeakables. Draco turned to her. Why would I do that? Maybe because someone made you see things differently, she said softly. He frowned. Where are you in all this? I don't see your name anywhere. She scanned the plaza. No statue of her. No mention on the memorial plaques lining the walls. No portrait in the grand building that loomed in the distance, its arches inscribed with the names of past ministers. Only Draco. A cold knot formed in her stomach. They walked in silence toward the ministry building. This future version, gleaming and open, its doors unguarded, students and elders alike, passing freely in and out. Inside, the atrium was transformed. No golden fountain, no roaring fireplaces. Instead, a vast tree grew from the floor to the ceiling, its roots wrapped around books, wands, and delicate gears of ancient magic. People sat in quiet study, children tracing runes in the air with their fingers. It was peaceful, harmonious, and still no sign of her. Maybe you died, Draco said suddenly, too blunt. Hermione flinched. Or maybe I chose to disappear. Why would you do that? She looked at him. Maybe because I helped you change the world, and then stepped away. Or maybe I rewrote something so deeply that my role was erased. Or, she hesitated, maybe I didn't survive the process of fixing the tapestry. Draco's jaw tightened. Don't say that. She turned to him, surprised by the edge in his voice. This future, he said, gesturing around. It's not real. Not yet. And if it depends on you not being in it, then I don't want it. She stared at him. A chime rang through the air, soft, resonant. The light in the plaza dimmed, then pulsed. The tapestry was calling him back. We have to go, she said. He didn't move. What if we stay, just a little longer, look for answers? We can't. Every moment we linger risks destabilizing the thread. We're not supposed to be here. He looked at his older self statue one last time. He's not wearing his family ring. She blinked. What? The Malfoy signet. My father's ring. I've worn it since I was 17. That man, he's not wearing it. Her pulse quickened. Then maybe he's not really you. Or, maybe something changed you so completely that you left the past behind. Draco met her eyes. Maybe that's the point of all this. Not to preserve history, but to become someone new. The chime rang again, more urgent. Hermione reached for his hand. Come on. This time he took it without hesitation. The air in the Hall of Prophecy hummed with a quiet resonance, like the after-image of a spell long cast. Before them the tapestry shimmered, its threads no longer static, but shifting in slow, deliberate pulses, gold and silver weaving through deep indigo, forming symbols that hadn't been there an hour ago. Draco stood at a distance, arms crossed, jaw tight. His reflection in the enchanted fabric was distorted, blurred at the edges, as if the tapestry refused to settle on who he truly was. That crest, he said, voice low. It shouldn't be there, not like that. Hermione didn't look up from her notes. It's not just your crest, Draco. It's woven into a sequence, events, decisions, consequences. There's a branching pattern here, like paths diverging across time. Yours intersects with mine, repeatedly. He stepped closer, eyes narrowing at the image now emerging. Two figures standing before a crumbling archway, their hands clasped, wands raised against a storm of dark light. One wore robes frayed at the hem, the other a cloak, stitched with silver serpents. That's not real, he muttered. "That's not us." "Not yet," she corrected, turning a page. "But it could be. The tapestry doesn't predict. It remembers futures that might have been, or could still be. Something, or someone is stitching new possibilities into the weave. And we're part of it." A cold draft curled through the hall, rustling the edges of the tapestry like a waking thing. Hermione traced a finger along a thread that pulsed faintly red, the color of blood magic, of sacrifice. There's a pattern in the damage. Each alteration starts with a moment of choice. A hesitation, a word left unsaid. Someone is going back, not to change history, but to refine it. Draco exhaled sharply. "And you think I'm part of this refinement? I think you're central to it." She finally looked at him, her gaze steady. "Your family's crest doesn't just appear. It's star-anchored star. It's tied to moments where the timeline fractures, where someone chooses loyalty over fear or courage over survival. Moments like the Room of Requirement, like the Malfoy Manor." He flinched. "Don't bring that up. Why not? It's real. It happened. And whatever is happening now, it's pulling from those moments like threads from a wound." She stepped closer to the tapestry, her hand hovering just above the image of the two figures. "Look, see how the thread loops back? It's not just moving forward. It's folding time onto itself. These portals we found, they're not just doorways, they're stitches. And if we don't understand who's holding the needle, we could unravel everything." Draco stared at the image of their entwined hands. "And if we fix it, what then? Do we go back to ignoring each other in the ministry corridors? Pretending this never happened?" Hermione hesitated. "I don't know. But I do know that every time we step through one of those portals, we see a version of ourselves who made a different choice. One where you didn't turn away in a corridor that night. One where I didn't hesitate before casting that spell. And in each of those lives, we're not enemies." A silence settled between them, thick with unspoken years. Draco looked away, his voice softer now. "I used to think fate was something written in old books and bloodlines. Something you couldn't change, no matter how hard you tried." He turned back to the tapestry. "But this is being rewritten, thread by thread, choice by choice." Hermione nodded. "Then maybe destiny isn't a path. Maybe it's a fabric, and we're the ones weaving it." Outside, the first bell of midnight tolled through the ministry. The tapestry flared once, a single thread glowing white-hot, before settling again into its slow, breath-like rhythm. And somewhere, deep within its folds, a door began to open. The air in the Chamber of Threads tasted of burnt silk and old lightning. Hermione's fingers trembled as she traced the newly woven sigil, crimson thread pulsing like a heartbeat, forming the unmistakable crest of House Lestrange. Not Bellatrix, not Rodolphus. A name none of them had spoken in centuries. Star Lysandra Star. "She was Abraxan Lestrange's daughter," Draco whispered, his voice uncharacteristically raw, erased from the family tapestries after she married a Muggle-born scholar from Prague. They said she vanished into obscurity. His eyes flickered with something like recognition. "But she didn't vanish, did she? She star-adapted star." Hermione stepped back, her breath shallow. The tapestry rippled again, not with grand historical shifts this time, but with quiet, insidious rewritings. A ministry decree banning wand sharing. A treaty between Hogwarts and Durmstrang dissolved. The statute of secrecy signed 5 years earlier than recorded. Subtle, but devastating. She's not trying to restore pure blood rule, she realized. She's building a world where blood purity was always star law, where dissent was never possible. A cold draft curled around them, though no doors had opened. The golden loon at the chamber's center, dormant for centuries, began to hum. Threads unfurled on their own, weaving images too fast to follow. A young woman with storm-gray eyes in a 19th-century dress, slipping through a tier in a tapestry behind a library shelf. The same woman decades later, her hair streaked with silver, humming as she stitched a dead man's memory into velvet. "She's been here all along," Hermione said, dread pooling in her chest. "Living between the threads, moving through time like it's a corridor." Draco's hand found the hilt of the silver dagger he'd taken from his mother's vault, enchanted to cut through illusions, they'd discovered 2 weeks prior in the siege of Hogsmeade that never was. Then she's not just rewriting history. She's star-curating Starret, Every rebellion quashed before it starts, every alliance broken before it forms. He looked at Hermione, his face half-shadowed in the tapestry's eerie glow. Including us. A ripple passed through the fabric. Suddenly, the scene shifted. A younger Hermione, standing in the Department of Mysteries, reaching for the tapestry, but her hand passed through it. The image fractured. Then, Draco, 17, standing at the edge of the forbidden forest, whispering a spell that should have called a thestral, but nothing came. The timeline rejecting their pivotal choices. "She's already tried to erase us," Hermione breathed. "Our decisions, they matter more than we thought." Another stitch pulsed, this one closer. The air thickened. From the corner of her eye, Hermione saw movement. A figure stepping out from behind a hanging of the Battle of Gormenghast, draped in robes the color of dried blood. Lysandre Lestrange. Not ancient, not young, ageless, as if time had smoothed her into something outside of years. Her eyes locked on to Draco's family crest woven into the future threads, star his star crest, interwoven with Hermione's name in shimmering bronze. "You found it," she said, voice like wind through broken glass. "The anomaly. The star impossible star." Draco stopped forward, shielding Hermione. "You don't get to decide what's impossible." Lysandre smiled, sad and sharp. "I've spent 200 years correcting the mistakes of cowards and compromisers. The world was meant to be pure, ordered, star-silent star. But you," she pointed at Hermione, then Draco, "you keep stitching chaos back in. Love across bloodlines, friendship across houses. It unravels everything." Hermione stepped beside Draco, their shoulders brushing. "Maybe that's the point," she said. "History isn't meant to be perfect. It's meant to be star live star." The loom roared to life. Threads lashed out like serpents. Then somewhere deep in the tapestry, a dozen hidden portals flickered open. Doors to moments not yet corrupted. Lysandre raised her hands. "Then I'll unmake you from the beginning." Draco tightened his grip on the dagger. "Try it," he said. "But know this. You're not fighting just us. You're fighting every choice we've ever made." The tapestry shivered. And then, with a sound like 1,000 pages turning at once, time itself held its breath. The tapestry pulsed like a living thing, its threads shimmering with stolen time. Hermione clutched her wand tightly, breath fogging in the sudden chill as the air around them cracked with displaced magic. Ahead, a shadow darted between shifting seams. A man in tattered robes, his face obscured by a hood stitched from darkness itself. He moved with unnatural speed, stepping through tapestry panels, as if they were doorways. After him, Draco cursed under his breath, stumbling as the floor beneath them transformed into a cobbled street slick with rain. This is absurd. One moment we're in the department. The next, he dodged a horse-drawn cart that hadn't existed a second before, its wheels clattering over wet stones. "We're in London, 1823, Hermione said, already scanning the scene, and he's trying to lose us in the weave. Stay close. He can't alter memory, only reroute it. The timeline's fighting him." She lunged forward, casting star. Tessera Insecker, Server's shred burst from her wand, coiling through the air like a serpent, latching onto the fabric of the fleeing man's cloak. The tapestry shuddered. The street dissolved into a burst of color, gold and emerald threads spiraling like storm clouds. They landed hard on a battlefield. Mud clung to Hermione's robes as she pushed herself up, the stench of iron and smoke thick in the air. Soldiers in scarlet uniforms clashed with robed duelists under a sky split by lightning. "The Second Wizarding Rebellion," she whispered. 1749. He's going further back, trying to unravel something foundational. Draco scrambled to his feet, his face pale. "That's not possible. No one can jump this deep without being torn apart by temporal recoil." "He's using the tapestry's core weave," Hermione said, eyes scanning the chaos. "It's shielding him, but it won't last. Every alteration sends ripples." "Look," she pointed. Duelist cast a curse, Star Avada Kedavra Star, a spell that shouldn't exist for another century. The word hung in the air like a wound. He's planting spells before their time, Draco realized. Distorting evolution. If this sticks, magic itself could fracture, she finished. We stop him. Now. They sprinted through the melee, ducking curses and trampling through history. The saboteur leapt toward a crumbling stone archway, woven not from memory, but from raw potential, the kind of portal only the tapestry's deepest threads could create. "No!" Hermione shouted, casting star. Frostra, Tella, star, ice spread across the arch, freezing the shimmering surface. The man shrieked as his hand touched it, threads snapping like violin strings. He whirled, finally lowering his hood. Hermione froze. It was a younger version of Regulus Black, but not as she knew him from records. His eyes glowed faintly silver, threaded with the same luminous filaments that ran through the tapestry. Draco inhaled sharply. "He's not just using the weave," Draco said slowly. "He's part of it." Regulus, or whatever wore his face, smiled. "I am the correction. The future was wrong. The war, the fall of pure blood, the merging of Muggle and magic. It ends here." "This isn't correction," Hermione said, stepping forward. "It's erasure. You're not fixing history. You're replacing it with your own design. The strong should rule," Regulus hissed, "and the tapestry will show the truth." He raised a hand, and the battlefield began to dissolve, threads unraveling upward into a vortex of light. Hermione grabbed Draco's arm. "He's collapsing the lair. If we don't move—" Draco didn't hesitate. He pulled a small vial from his robes, liquid silver, swirling with trapped starlight. "Found this in my father's old vault. He called it the Weaver's Tear. Supposedly it binds broken magic." Hermione's eyes widened. "You kept it? Call it a hunch," he said grimly. Together, they threw the vial into the vortex. Light exploded. Threads snapped, rewove, flared with memory and fire. The world spun, castles rose and crumbled. Wands were first raised in defiance. Love bloomed in shadows between enemies. They saw themselves smaller, younger, standing on opposite sides of a great hall, fear in their eyes, pride in their spines, and then silence. They stood once more before the great tapestry. Whole again, it seems calm. Regulus was gone. Only a faint shimmer remained where he'd stood, like a tear mended by invisible hands. Draco exhaled. "Do you think we changed anything?" Hermione touched the tapestry gently. A single thread, gold and silver entwined, pulsed beneath her fingers. "I think," she said softly, "we just made it honest." The air in the chamber of threads was thick with the scent of aged wool and ozone, a hum beneath their feet, like the pulse of a slumbering beast. Hermione stepped forward first, her wand casting a narrow beam of lumos that danced across the shifting weave. Before them, the tapestry no longer showed grand historical tableaus. Instead, it spiraled inward, revealing two smaller shimmering panels, one of a younger Hermione, clutching a time-turner in the dim corridors of Hogwarts, the other of a boy with pale hair, walking the astronomy tower, his hand trembling around a wand. "This is wrong," Draco muttered, voice low. "That night, it's not like that." Hermione glanced at him. "It's not real, not anymore, but it's been rewritten." They stepped through, cold stone at Hermione's boots. She recognized the hallway instantly, 4th floor, near the library. But the torches burned green, and the shadows clung too tightly to the corners. There she was, younger, bushy-haired, eyes wide with determination as she twisted the time-turner. And instead of vanishing, she froze mid-turn, her form flickering like a dying candle. "What's happening?" Hermione whispered. "She's stuck," Hermione said. "The timeline's fractured. She's trying to rewrite something, but it's not working." Then the scene shifted. The younger Hermione wasn't using the time-turner to save Sirius. She was using it to prevent the troll attack in first year, erasing the moment she and Ron and Harry became friends. The corridor dissolved into a memory of empty classrooms, silence where laughter should have been. "No," Hermione breathed. "That's not— I didn't." "You changed your mind," Draco said, quieter now. "You were scared, alone. You thought if you'd never been saved, you'd never have been targeted, never have been called mudblood. You thought you'd be safer." Hermione turned to him, stunned. "How do you know that?" He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the other panel, which had begun to glow. They were pulled forward again. This time, the air was damp, the sky a bruised purple above Hogwarts. The astronomy tower. Draco stood before them, 11 years old, robes too long, clutching a letter sealed with a Malfoy crest. But instead of pocketing it, he threw it into the wind. The words, once etched in duty and blood purity, were gone. He refused the legacy, Hermione realized. Draco swallowed. "I never did. You were 11, you didn't know any different." "I knew enough," he said, voice tight. "I knew what they wanted me to become, and I said yes." The younger Draco lifted his head, face pale but resolute. "I won't serve him," he said to the empty tower. "I won't be like them." The tapestry trembled. Hermione reached out, not to the image but to Draco. Her fingers brushed his wrist. "You would have been brave, if given the chance." He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since they'd entered the chamber. "And you would have stayed hidden your whole life, if it meant never being hurt." She didn't deny it. The panels began to unravel, threads snapping like overtuned strings. The false pasts collapsed into smoke, leaving only the true weave behind, the real moments. Hermione stepping forward despite the troll, Draco lowering his wand in the bathroom, both of them choosing something other than fear. The tapestry pulsed once, softly, like a heartbeat returning to rhythm. "We weren't meant to see that," Hermione said. "Not yet, no," Draco agreed. "But we needed to." They stood in silence, the weight of what might have been settling between them. Not just the choices, but the loneliness. How close they had both come to walking paths that erased everything. When Hermione finally turned to leave, Draco didn't follow at once. She stopped, looked back. He touched the tapestry one last time, where their threads, once distant, now interwoven, ran side by side. "I used to think blood decided who we were," he said. "Now I think it's moments, small ones, unseen." She smiled, faint but real. "Then we've had a lot of them, and together they stepped back into the present, the past behind them. Not erased, but understood." The air in the tapestry's core was not air at all, but the absence of breath, a silence so deep it hummed against the bones. Hermione stood barefoot on a surface that was neither floor nor thread, her toes curling into something that felt like solidified twilight. Around her the tapestry unraveled into infinity, strands of silver and crimson, gold and bruised violet, floating like severed nerves in a void between seconds. Draco stood opposite her, his wand not in hand but cradled in his open palm, its tip glowing faintly with the residual warmth of time's mending. They had come too far for words now. Too many moments had been restored, the Triwizard Tournament rerouted with a whisper, the Department of Mysteries battle, corrected with trembling hands, the night at Malfoy Manor, rewritten so that her scream never came. Each correction had cost them something, a memory, a feeling, a version of themselves that no longer fit. And yet, here, at the final stitch, something unspoken had settled between them, as if the tapestry itself had been weaving more than history. Hermione lifted her hand. A single thread hovered before her, luminous and trembling, white as snow, threaded through with faint gold. The future, untouched, unwritten, it pulsed like a heartbeat. "This is it," she said, voice barely a breath. "One last weave, together." Draco nodded. No sarcasm, no hesitation, just quiet understanding. He reached out, his fingers brushing hers as they both clasped the thread. A jolt passed between them, not magic, not pain, but recognition, the kind that comes after years of war, silence, and slow, reluctant forgiveness. They began. Their movements were not spoken, not planned. Instinct guided them, shaped by weeks spent dancing through time, stepping over echoes of their younger selves. Hermione pulled the thread into a spiral, whispering an incantation older than Hogwarts. Draco answered with a countermotion, his voice low and steady, weaving in a charm from the Malfoy grimoire, one he'd once called dark, now repurposed for restoration. The thread flared, brightening as it split into 2, then 4, then 100, each strand finding its place in the vast design. Images flickered around them, brief, ghostly. A classroom where they argued over arithmancy, a library bathed in moonlight, where he found her weeping after the Battle of Hogwarts, a train platform years from now, where 2 children with storm-gray eyes and wild brown curls ran ahead, laughing. The tapestry was showing them not what had been, but what could be, what they had earned. The final knot formed slowly, a shimmering nexus, where past, present, and future converged. Hermione felt it in her chest, A tightening, a release. Draco's hand tightened around hers. "It's not just about fixing time, is it?" he asked, voice rough. "No," she whispered. "It's about choosing it. All of it. Even the parts we hated." A pulse ran through the void. The threads snapped into place with a sound like 1,000 pages turning at once. Light erupted, not blinding, but warm, like sunrise through stained glass. The tapestry folded in on itself, not vanishing but settling, becoming whole. They stood there, hands still joined, as the cord dissolved around them. The floor beneath their feet became stone. The air tasted of dust and old parchment. They were back in the Department of Mysteries, in the circular room where it had all begun. The great tapestry hung silent on the wall, its surface now seamless, its colors deep and true. Hermione exhaled. "It's done." Draco looked at her, really looked, at the smudge of ink on her temple, the way air crackled with static, the quiet triumph in her eyes. "We did it," he said. Then softer, "Thank you." She smiled. "You stayed. That was the hardest part." He didn't answer. Didn't need to. Outside, the first ring of spring tapped against the ministry windows. Somewhere, time moved forward, clean, unbroken, and between them, a single thread, invisible but unbroken, remained. The silence that followed was not empty, but thick, like the air after a storm has passed, and the world holds its breath, unsure whether to begin again. The tapestry hung still, its once churning surface now smooth as glass. The colors settled into familiar patterns of history restored. Yet the air hummed faintly, a low thrum beneath the stone of the Department of Mysteries, as if the walls themselves were remembering what had just transpired. Hermione stood first, stepping back from the great loom with a shudder. Her fingers trembled at her sides, still tingling with the residual magic of thread weaving, of time stitching. She looked down at her wrist, where a thin golden thread remained coiled like a bracelet, warm against her skin. It pulsed faintly, in time with her heartbeat. Malfoy was beside her, quiet for once. He flexed his hand, watching the same thread curl around his own wrist, unbroken. "Still there," he murmured. "Didn't think it would." "It's not supposed to," Hermione said softly. She turned her arm, studying the way the thread caught the dim, sourceless light of the chamber. It wasn't like the other threads. Those had been fleeting, unraveling the moment a moment was restored. This one felt permanent, intentional. A beat passed, then another. "We'd fixed it," she said, more to herself than to him. "The Battle of Hogwarts. Your mother's choice. Sirius's fall. All of it's back where it should be." "Mostly," Malfoy corrected. His voice was low, rough at the edges. "Some things can't be rewoven perfectly, you know that." She did. She remembered the version of herself who had never met Harry, who had chosen books over friendship, who had become a recluse in the ministry archives. She remembered the boy Draco, who had never questioned his father's path, who had fallen completely into the dark. They had stitched those threads back, yes, but not without leaving faint scars in the fabric. And yet the tapestry hadn't rejected them. It had included them. Hermione exhaled. "We didn't just fix history, we added to it." Malfoy turned to her then, his gray eyes searching her face. There was no sneer, no old bitterness, only something quieter, harder to name. "You know," he said, "when I was 12, my father told me the world was made of bloodlines and power, that the rest, sentiment, choice, second chances, was weakness." She watched him, saying nothing. He lifted his wrist slightly, the golden thread glinting. "Turns out, the world is made of threads, and some of them—" He paused, as if testing the words. "Some of them tie people together, whether they want them to or not." Hermione felt something shift inside her, subtle as a single thread pulled taut. She remembered holding his hand in the chamber of time, not for magic, but because he was afraid. Remembered him shielding her from a rip in the weave that spat out cursed fire. Remembered the way he'd looked at her when they'd stepped back into the present. Relief, yes, but also something like wonder. She reached out, not touching the thread, but hovering near it. "Do you think it will ever come off? Does it need to?" he asked. The question hung between them, delicate as spun silk. Outside the chamber, distant footsteps echoed, Kingsley's voice calling their names. The real world was calling them back, responsibilities, reports. The ministry would want explanations, and there would be questions about the tapestry, about the Malfoy crest that had briefly glowed in a future, about why the two of them had been the only ones the magic allowed to enter. But for now, in this quiet, in this space between seconds, Hermione looked at Draco Malfoy. Not as an enemy, not as an ally, but as someone who had walked through time beside her, who had seen her at her most uncertain, and still chosen to follow. And the thread around their wrists, golden, unbroken, seemed less like a mark of duty, and more like a promise. Rain fell in silver sheets over Diagon Alley, but it didn't soak the cobbles. Instead, it pooled into shimmering glyphs that dissolved after 3 seconds, leaving behind the faint scent of burnt parchment. Hermione Granger paused beneath the awning of flourish and blots, watching the anomaly with narrowed eyes. This wasn't weather. This was residual magic, echoes of recalibration. She pulled her cloak tighter, the wool still smelling faintly of the tapestry's enchanted threads. 3 days since they'd closed the portal at the Battle of Hogwarts, sealing the moment when young Draco had hesitated in the Room of Requirement. They'd done nothing overt, only ensured the boy made the same choice, but with clearer intent. Not out of fear, out of choice. A subtle shift. And yet the world had begun to stitch itself differently. Inside the bookshop, the display of Star Hogwarts, a history star, had changed. The cover now bore a small, unfamiliar sigil in the corner, a double helix woven with thorns and hawthorn. Hermione picked up a copy, fingers tracing the embossing. She didn't remember that symbol. She star should star have. A voice, dry and measured, came from behind her. Still collecting obsolete facts, Granger. She didn't turn. Still lurking in places you don't belong, Malfoy. Draco stepped beside her, sleeves rolled to the elbows, a faint bruise along his jawline from their last jump through the tapestry. His family's crest, once tarnished in the threads of the future, now pulsed with a quiet silver light whenever they neared a correction point. He glanced at the book. That wasn't there before. No, she said. It wasn't. He picked up another volume, Star, Magical Theory, and the Ethics of Intervention Star. The author's name had changed. Septima Vector was now listed as co-author, though she'd been retired for years. Draco flipped through the pages. She didn't publish anything after 2003. She did in this version, Hermione murmured. Or will. He gave her a sidelong look. We're changing things we didn't even touch. I know, she exhaled. The tapestry isn't just recording history. It's responding to intention. Not just what we fix, but star, why star? Bell chimed. A bell chimed as the door opened, and a young witch entered, laughing. She wore a scarf patterned with moving constellations, house black, but woven with stars that spiraled in opposite directions. Draco stiffened. That's Andromeda's granddaughter, he said quietly. But she used to have her mother's eyes. Now they're mine. Hermione studied the girl. The resemblance was faint, but undeniable. A tilt of the chin, the way she held her shoulders. As if the Malfoy line, once severed by Pride and Prejudice, had quietly reknit itself into the future. They left the shop without buying anything. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air hummed. A cart of enchanted quills down the street now rode in 2 languages at once, English and an archaic Gaelic variant. A child giggled as his toy broomstick flew in perfect spirals, something no junior model should be able to do. It's spreading, Draco said. Not just memories, outcomes. Hermione thought of the last portal, the moment she'd convinced her younger self not to erase her parents' memories. She hadn't changed it, only whispered into the silence. Star. What if you trusted them instead? Star. And now, somewhere in Australia, 2 dentists remembered their daughter. They were coming home. She touched her chest where a locket now rested, simple, silver, warm. A gift from a version of her mother who had never forgotten her. Draco noticed the gesture. You feel it too, don't you? Like the world's breathing differently. She nodded. We didn't just mend history. We softened it. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, softly. My father's trial. It's been moved to next week. But the charges, they're different. Less about allegiance, more about negligence. As if the ministry no longer believes he truly believed in the cause. Hermione looked at him. That's not a small thing. No, he said. It's not. It means he might walk free, not because of connections, because the truth changed. They stood there, two figures, on a street that remembered them slightly differently than it had yesterday. Above, the clouds parted, revealing a sky where the stars blinked in and out of sequence, like threads being rewoven in real time. And somewhere, deep in the Department of Mysteries, the tapestry pulsed, its threads now interlaced with two lives that had once been frayed, now drawn closer, stitch by careful stitch. The air in the Wisingamote chamber was thick with tension, each breath tasting of old parchment and unspoken accusations. Hermione stood at the center of the semicircular dais, her robes slightly rumpled from hours of questioning, her fingers clenched around the edge of the witness podium. The high-backed chairs of the council loomed above her like judgmental sentinels, their occupants murmuring behind hands or exchanging glances that spoke volumes. She had just finished recounting the third shift in the tapestry, how the fall of Voldemort had briefly rewritten itself to show a world where he ruled through a puppet ministry, his name stitched in silver thread across what should have been Dumbledore's legacy. "Are you certain," intoned Justice Thaddeus Greaves, his voice slow and deliberate, "that your own interference did not trigger these alterations?" Hermione exhaled through her nose. "The tapestry responded to forces beyond my control. The magic is ancient, layered with time-binding enchantments that predate the ministry itself. I don't star control star it. I'm trying to star understand star it." A murmur rippled through the chamber. One of the younger council members, a witch with tightly braided hair, leaned forward. "And yet, Miss Granger, you were the one who first breached the department's inner sanctum without authorization. You bypassed 7 security enchantments. For someone so loyal to rule and order, that seems inconsistent." "I went because no one else would," Hermione said, voice steady, despite the tremor in her chest. "Because the threads were already fraying. Because if we waited for bureaucracy to act, the entire weave of magical history could have unraveled." Another voice cut in, smooth, measured, and utterly unexpected. "She's telling the truth." Every head turned. Draco Malfoy stepped forward from the shadowed tier, his silver blonde hair catching the dim, enchanted light. He wore no official robes, only tailored black with a serpent pin at his collar. His presence alone silenced the room. For years he had avoided the Wisingamote, distancing himself from his father's legacy, choosing quiet reparation over public redemption. But now he stood before them, calm, composed, and unafraid. "I was there," he continued, "when the first shift occurred. I saw the tapestry, right, the Battle of Hogwarts, saw my own family's crest stitched into the ranks of the Fallen Order. That wasn't prophecy, that was sabotage, and if Granger hadn't acted, we'd all be living in a version of history that never was." Greaves narrowed his eyes. "And why should we trust star you star, Mr. Malfoy? Your family's record speaks for itself." Draco didn't flinch. "Because unlike some in this room, I've spent the last decade proving I'm not my father. Because I've verified the time-stitch anomalies of my own research. And because, despite every reason not to, I've stood beside Granger in those portals, seen what happens when history forgets its true shape." A beat of silence, then another. Hermione stared at him, her throat tight. She had expected him to stay in the shadows, to let the ministry tear her credibility apart. But here he was, dismantling their doubt with cold precision. "She didn't act alone," Draco said, turning to face her briefly. His gray eyes held something she couldn't name. Respect, perhaps, or something deeper. "We're both accountable, but we're also the only ones who've seen what's at stake. The tapestry isn't just showing us star what was star. When it's aside, it's showing us star what could be star, and what we must protect." The chamber remained still. Even the enchanted ceiling above, usually reflecting the shifting mood of the assembly, hung in muted twilight. Finally, Greaves leaned back. "Then the ministry will assign oversight. No more unilateral action." Hermione opened her mouth to protest, but Draco spoke first. "That would be a mistake," he said. "The tapestry responds to trust, not control. It knows when we're trying to manipulate it. If you send in your auras with chains and incantations, you accelerate the unraveling." He paused. "We're not enemies here, we're caretakers. And if we don't start treating it like that, none of our names will matter, because there won't be a history left to remember them." The air in the Department of Mysteries hung still, thick with the scent of ancient wool and cold stone. Moonlight, thin and silver, slipped through the high arched windows, casting long shadows across the vast tapestry that dominated the chamber. Threads shimmered faintly, like dew on spider silk, shifting in patterns too slow for the eye to catch, except when you weren't looking directly at them. That was when the magic revealed itself. A ripple here, a color bleed there, as if the past were breathing. Hermione sat cross-legged on the worn rug before the tapestry, her back against a marble plinth, a half-finished cup of tea cooling beside her. Her fingers traced the edge of a frayed seam near the depiction of the Battle of Hogwarts, a scene that now showed a version of events that never happened. Harry disarmed, Voldemort triumphant, the Malfoy family standing on the wrong side of a war they had tried at the last to abandon. Draco had been quiet for an hour. He stood near the eastern edge of the chamber, one hand resting lightly on a spool of luminous thread that had unraveled from the weave like a vein of starlight. "You keep touching it," Hermione said softly, not looking up. "Like it might answer you." He exhaled, a low, measured breath. "Maybe it does, in its own way." She turned then, studying him. The moonlight caught the sharp line of his jaw, the faint shadows beneath his eyes. They'd been chasing anomalies for days, mending ruptures in time, whispering forgotten truths into the ears of their younger selves through the tapestry's portals. Each journey left them both more worn, more aware, and somehow closer. "It showed me something earlier," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Before you came in, a different ending, one where I never hesitated at the astronomy tower, where I cast the curse." Hermione's breath caught. She knew that moment, the fracture point, the choice that had defined him. "But you didn't," she said gently. "You lowered your wand." "I didn't want to," he admitted. "Not really. I was so afraid, but it wasn't bravery, just weakness. I couldn't do it." "Its star was star bravery," she said, rising to her feet. "Doing something when you're terrified. That's what it means. Not the absence of fear, but facing it." He looked at her, then really looked, and something in his expression softened, a crack in the armor he'd worn since childhood. "You always knew that, didn't you? Even when I didn't." They stood in silence, the tapestry pulsing faintly between them, threads glinting with hues that hadn't been there an hour ago. A new image was forming, not of war, not of blood, but of two figures standing in a corridor, years ago. A younger Hermione, tears in her eyes, turning away from a younger Draco, his face twisted in something between anger and regret. "I never apologized," he said, "for the things I said." "Recalling you." "You don't have to say it," she interrupted, stepping closer. "I forgave you a long time ago, but I didn't forgive myself." She reached out, her fingers brushing the back of his hand, a small touch, tentative, warm. He didn't pull away. The tapestry shimmered. A new thread wove itself into being, gold and deep crimson, braided together, running through scenes of Diagon Alley, the Hogwarts Express, the Chamber of Secrets, the Room of Requirement, moments they'd shared even when they hadn't known they were sharing anything at all. "It's not just fixing history," Hermione murmured. "It's showing us what was always there." Draco turned his hand, letting her fingers slip into his. "What if we're not meant to change it? What if we're meant to understand it?" Outside, the first hint of dawn touched the horizon. The air hummed with quiet magic, the kind that didn't shout, but settled into bones and lingered. They stood there, hand in hand, watching as the tapestry stitched their story not as enemies, not as strangers, but as two threads pulled from different spools, now woven, at last, into the same design. The silence in the Hall of Prophecy was unlike anything Hermione had ever known. It wasn't just quiet, it was a hollow, breathless absence, as if the air itself had been wrapped in velvet and set aside. The tapestry loomed before them, its once vibrant threads now dull and still, its story complete. No shimmering futures, no shifting silks rewriting destinies, just stillness. And Draco, standing at her side, breathing slowly, evenly like he was afraid to disturb it. She didn't look at him at first. She couldn't. After everything, the leaps through time, the fractured memories of their younger selves standing in dueling courtyards and burning corridors, the moment she'd watched him hesitate over Dumbledore's broken body and felt her heart crack in two, she didn't trust her voice, Or worse, she feared what it might betray. "It's over," he said, voice low, almost reverent. She nodded, eyes tracing the final embroidered thread, a single gold strand weaving through obsidian, forming a pattern she hadn't seen before. Two figures, back to back, cloaked in storm and starlight. One held a book bound in thorn vines, the other a wand shaped like a broken valley. Their silhouettes were indistinct, blurred by time, yet unmistakable. "It's not just over," she whispered. "It's rewritten." He turned then, his gray eyes catching the dim, residual glow of extinguished magic. "We rewrote it, not just history, us." A shiver ran through her, not from cold, from truth. "I spent so long believing you were set in stone, Draco, arrogant, cold, a Malfoy through and through." She finally met his gaze. "But I saw you, really saw you, in that moment at Hogwarts, when you couldn't cast the curse, when you looked away." His jaw tightened. "I wasn't brave. I was afraid." "No," she said, stepping closer. "Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing not star, to become what you're meant to be. You chose differently, again and again." He exhaled, a broken sort of laugh. "And you forgave me." "I didn't forgive you," she said softly. "I understood you. That's harder, and more important." Silence again. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was soft, like snow settling. "You know," he murmured, "I used to hate seeing you in the Great Hall. The way you'd argue with professors, how Potter and Weasley followed you like a storm follows lightning. I thought you were insufferable." She arched a brow. "And now? Now I think you were magnificent," he said, voice rough. "Infuriating, impossible, but magnificent." She smiled, just slightly. "And you were always just a boy who didn't know how to be anything but what your name demanded." He reached out, slow, as if testing whether she'd pull away. His fingers brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear. His touch was warm, real. "I don't want to go back to pretending," he said, "to the silence, to the distance." "Neither do I," she admitted. The tapestry stirred, not with magic, but with memory. A faint hum, like a lullaby half-remembered, pulsed through the hall. The gold thread between the two figures brightened, just for a moment, then faded. They didn't move, didn't speak. Instead, Draco leaned forward, hesitating just an inch from her lips. "May I?" Hermione didn't answer with words. She closed the space. The kiss was quiet, gentle. A beginning, not a climax. It tasted of old regrets and new promises, of library dust and storm-washed air. It was not fire, but ember, warm, steady, something meant to last. When they parted, her fingers found his, lacing through without thought. "We've spent our lives running from who we were," she said. "Maybe now we get to choose who we become." He squeezed her hand. "Together?" She looked at him, really looked. Not the boy from the dungeons, not the man shaped by war, but the one who had walked through time to stand here, now, with her. "Yes," she said, "together." The air in the Department of Mysteries hung thick with the scent of old parchment and ozone, the kind of quiet that pressed against the eardrums like cotton. Hermione stood before the tapestry, her fingers still tingling from the last thread she had reknit, the final shimmer of magic fading into the fabric like smoke. It no longer pulsed with erratic light or twisted scenes of impossible futures. Now it lay still, whole, coherent, and deeply, profoundly silent. Draco stood a few paces behind her, his silhouette sharp against the dim blue glow of the orb arches. He hadn't spoken since they'd mended the last frayed moment, the one where his younger self had chosen to walk away from the room of requirement, where fire had consumed more than just wood and stone. That version of history had been rewritten, not erased, and something in his posture suggested he felt the weight of that change like a bruise beneath the ribs. "It's done," Hermione said, more to herself than to him. Her voice was soft, but it echoed in the hollow chamber. "For now," Draco replied. His tone wasn't cynical. It was careful, measured, like he was testing the truth of his own words. She turned to look at him. The tapestry's residual glow caught the silver in his hair, the faint lines around his eyes, lines that hadn't been there 5 years ago, let alone during the war. They had both aged in ways that couldn't be seen in mirrors. Some scars lived beneath the skin. "You didn't have to stay," she said. "I didn't have a choice," he answered, and for the first time there was no bitterness in it. The tapestry wove me in, whether I liked it or not. She shook her head. That's not what I meant. You could have walked away after the first portal, after you saw what you saw. His gaze flickered to hers, and for a moment, something raw passed between them, unspoken, undeniable. He had seen himself as a boy, trembling in the Malfoy drawing room as his father spoke of purity and power. He had seen the exact second he stopped believing in the cause and started fearing for his life. And she had been there, not as an enemy, but as someone who reached out, not to save him, but to remember him. I stayed, he said quietly, because someone finally saw me. Hermione exhaled, her breath catching. The weight of all they'd lived through, the fractured timelines, the whispered confessions in candlelit ruins of past battles, the moment in 1996 when they had stood inches apart in an abandoned corridor at Hogwarts and star-known star, without speaking, that the world was about to break. None of it could be undone. But it could be understood. Outside, the first hints of dawn bled through the Ministry's enchanted ceilings. The tapestry no longer glowed, but as Hermione glanced back, she thought she saw a single thread, fine as dew, shimmering gold, flicker, once, then settle. Two figures were woven there now, not as children or enemies, but as they were, side by side, hands almost touching, their futures no longer separate but braided together like the roots of an ancient tree. They walked through the silent halls together, their footsteps muffled by the deep carpet. Neither spoke. There was no need. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of all the things they had lived, all they had healed, all they had yet to say. When they reached the atrium, the fountain of magical brethren sparkled under the rising light. Draco paused, one hand resting briefly on the edge of the marble basin. I don't know what comes next, he admitted. Hermione looked at him, really looked. Not at the boy who had once sneered at her blood, not at the man the world still whispered about, but at the one who had stepped through fire with her, literally and otherwise. Neither do I, she said. But I think we'll find out together. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise, woven, thread by thread, in quiet courage and unexpected grace.